These arrest stories will make you question everything. Even the cops felt guilty. This one literally just happened. I'm not sure how the guy ended up here, but he had no phone, no family to call, wasn't welcome at the homeless shelter because he was caught drinking there. It was very cold outside. Mental health evaluated him and kicked him, saying they couldn't help. Didn't have any vouchers or money to stay at a motel. He asked to go to jail. I warned him of trespassing at the police department for the next 24 hours, and he refused to leave. So I arrested him for trespassing. It was the worst option. So I've been to jail a couple of times, but my town's got a pretty big homeless problem. There's a lot of shelters and everything, but it's just not enough sometimes. I don't even know how many people I was locked up with who had a similar story. No family, no place to stay, no food, no reason for mental hold, and all they want is 3 hot meals in the cart. So they'll trespass, or go commit petty theft and intentionally get caught. Just little things that they'd rather have on their record than go another night starving in the cold. Some of the saddest stuff I've ever seen. It was Christmas Eve at a super fancy hotel downtown in my city. This lady drove her vehicle into a parking barrier and hotel security got called in. Got out there and she had her daughter in the car with her. Mum had recently bought her a Christmas puppy, a tiny little corgi. So anyways, I called for one of our DWI units to do the test because it's a felony for the child passenger. Mum fails and we have to handcuff her. She tried to run and my partner takes her to the ground as she falls, slipping all in front of her daughter and Christmas puppy. Mum goes to jail and I had to stay with a little girl until her aunt arrived. I learned Dad walked out on them earlier in the month and Mum was having a tough time dealing with it. And look, she needed to go to jail. She was drunk, but I really felt for her and her daughter. I draw the blood for DWI arrests, so I'm not a cop, but I was sitting in the assistant district attorney's office when an officer calls in, and he stated that he felt horrible arresting this lady for drunk driving, even though she was plastered, because she was at her boyfriend's house and they were all drinking, and the boyfriend's friends started trying to have their way with her, and her boyfriend did nothing about it. So she hit the one friend in the head and got in her car and fled from danger. Another driver called her into 911 for swerving. She drove 3 miles and had made it to a gas station where she was found trying to call her friends on the phone for help. He felt really bad that he had to bring her in, but the ADA didn't accept any charges on her, and the officer took her to her friend's house. 2 other officers went back to the boyfriend's house, and they got arrested with existing warrants and this new one for SA. Seeing that woman sitting in the jail for the few minutes that she was there was heartbreaking. She was covered in scratches and her clothes were all torn up. I'm so glad they didn't charge her for fleeing, being the victim of those horrible people. I mean, it's horrible that she went through that, but thank God they didn't press charges, and honestly, net bonus that those guys got bought in. I really hope she had the time and support to recover after that. As a probation agent, I was supervising Tim, early 20s, on probation for possession of narcotics. Tim lived in assisted living apartments due to severe mental health. Great person who just needed help learning more about his mental health. I received a report that Tim started to like one of the staff members, Stacy. She worked 3rd shift at their main house and often handed out medication. I talked to Tim about healthy boundaries between clients and staff. So let's fast forward a couple of days. Tim checked himself in at the hospital because he tried to make a few advances with Stacy but was denied. Stacy described it as scary, as she was working in the main house and he followed her into her room and shut the door. Another staff member intervened. She then proceeds to make a report about other behaviors like him staring at her and trying to be around her. He was arrested and had a short-term jail hold of 4 days, and we placed a no-contact order on him. Fast forward a few weeks, I receive another report from Stacy stating that Tim continues to linger around the main building when she's there at night. The night before, she was on med duty and he went to pick up his medication. She asked him to leave multiple times, but he never did. He continued to try to make advances toward her. She felt extremely unsafe. I issue a warrant and go to his apartment. I'm waiting for police to arrive and I ask him about that contact. He kept repeating, "I shouldn't have listened to her. I shouldn't have listened to her." However, he wouldn't go into much depth. The police arrive and he goes to jail. I talk with my supervisor about if we should revoke his probation, as Tim is engaging in stalking behavior. I was finishing up my investigation and Tim adamantly denied Stacy ever telling him to leave that night. Finally, he breaks down and said they'd been having a relationship for the past few months. Sure as heck, I checked his Facebook account and it's apparent they were dating. She assured him nobody would find out. We see the messages arranging times to meet. Extremely flirty and racy messages were sent between them as well. The witch Stacy told me he was stalking her so she wouldn't lose her job. She reported the gestures as unwanted because other staff members caught them together. I was angry that he went to jail, let alone that we almost proceeded with revocation. I felt awful and apologized for the time he spent in jail. This was reported to the supervisor, but the frickin' witch didn't lose her job. Anyone else would have their social work license revoked or face criminal charges. She just kept on working there. The county moved Tim to a different program. In short, client was accused of stalking a staff member of his assisted living program. Turns out staff and client were in a relationship, and staff made a false report so that she'd save her own hide. I'm no longer a cop, but my first ever DUI arrest was a guy I went to a very small college with, and we graduated together. I knew his family, his dog's name. We were friends. He was weaving all over both lanes and running onto the shoulder on both sides of the road. He cried and begged me to just let him go and that he'd walk home and that he was sorry. He had to go to jail. I used to live with a cop. She was called to a shoplifting incident and found a young, totally emaciated-looking boy who couldn't have been older than 12, who the shopkeeper had pinched stealing some bare essentials, a loaf of bread or a can of beans or something. She and her partner did everything they could to talk him out of pressing charges on the kid, but the shopkeeper insisted, and unfortunately, her partner that day happened to be a superior or something, and whether or not to follow through with the arrest was out of her hands. She had to take this crying, scared, starving boy to juvenile prison with teenagers who committed real-life crimes. She did everything she could to ensure he got immediate social services attention and lobbied to keep the charges from appearing on his record at all. But she still felt broken having to do that to a kid who needed help. I was doing volunteer work with disadvantaged children in the community. It was basically an after-school program for kids who were from broken families and needed a supportive place to be. In talking with the supervisor, she explained how rough it is for some kids. On graduation day, most of the kids' parents will actually show up. The police know this, and they show up as well and use it as an opportunity to arrest any parents with outstanding warrants. So you're a 9-year-old whose parents are never in your life because they're deadbeats. It's supposed to be a happy day and mum and dad are actually there, but then they get hauled off in handcuffs. It just sucks all round. Woman calls 911 from the hospital. Says she's been victim of the unspeakable act in our jurisdiction and was at the hospital awaiting a kit to prove if she's the victim of said act. Officer responds and begins his preliminary investigation. He had been talking to this woman for a couple of hours when dispatch raised him on the radio. The dispatcher decided it was a good idea to run a warrant check on the woman and had discovered she was wanted through Kentucky, not the state that we were in, with full extradition, meaning that if she were found in any state in the county, the state of Kentucky wanted her shipped back to face their charges. I don't recall what it actually was that she was wanted for, but it wasn't for anything I'd considered major enough to warrant full extradition. At that point, the officer didn't really have a choice but to take her into custody. Obviously, we waited until after she was treated and released from the hospital, but nonetheless, that was a crappy moment despite the magnitude of whatever she did in that other state. Not a cop, but a paramedic. Had a patient that was driving on a freeway at 100 kilometers per hour when she started having a seizure. A man, also driving on the freeway, noticed her slumped at the wheel, so he sped up, pulled in front of her, and used his car to slow hers down. I rock up, assess, and go to transport the lady to hospital. Cops rock up as they do and find the man had warrants out for his arrest. Slightly awkward, but he had to leave his car on the freeway and go off to the cells. Well, I don't know what the guy was wanted for, but yeah, I'd be pretty peeved off if one of my big selfless acts ended up with me in jail. No good deed goes unpunished, I guess. Then again, maybe he was wanted for multiple murders or something, so the jury's still out on that one. This happened to some friends of mine. My friend Jay is allergic to a lot of things, and accidentally ate something she was allergic to. Her parents called an ambulance, but it's a small town and it was already attending an accident, so they rushed her to the hospital themselves. Her dad was driving and was speeding and somehow managed to get pulled over by the one cop that wasn't attending the accident. Thankfully, the officer realized pretty quickly what was going on. Apparently, he was surprised my friend's dad pulled over at all, given the circumstances. He couldn't allow her parents to speed the rest of the way, so he put Jay and her mum in his car and rushed her up to the hospital himself. Stayed there until he was sure she was okay. My friend's dad still got a ticket, but the cop also gave him some advice on how to dispute it, given that it was an emergency. I believe in the end he got off. 4 attorneys go golfing. While golfing, one accuses the other of being a cheat. Argument escalates until the accuser loses his mind and hits the guy with a golf club over the back. Hard enough to leave a mark and snap the head off the golf club. Arrest the dude and he's just sobbing in the patrol unit about how he'll lose his license and he's so far in debt with his school loans. The guy needed to be arrested, but you had to feel empathy with him knowing he'd just drunkenly flushed his degree down the toilet. I read 4 attorneys go golfing and started waiting for the punchline. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? My mother told me about a case she had. She didn't make the arrest, but was the investigator. So basically, the woman was stalked by her ex and constantly hounded. She tried to go to the cops about it 17 times, with proof and everything, and they didn't do anything. So she and her friends kidnapped him, beat him up, and threw him undressed into a ditch. It also made a lot of news in the big papers in Germany here. That said, it's quite funny to find out about stuff that will go in the news 6 months before the first article comes to be. In the end, her friends and her were arrested, for the kidnappings and stuff. But here is a big difference between Germany and the USA. In Germany, the police will not only investigate to prove you guilty, but also to prove you innocent. This is why in Germany, you should talk with the police. In the end, I believe she got a lowered punishment because of these special circumstances. I've heard a story from a police officer in Australia where medical Mary J wasn't legal yet, having to arrest someone for supplying Mary J oil to kids with cancer and severe epilepsy. There was a news article stating that they felt like total pieces of crap because the bloke they raided was a decent person trying to help a family friend with crippling illness and not actually selling the stuff to junkies. Even though it's legal now, it's so tremendously difficult to get, people still need to find other avenues to obtain it. There was also that guy in Queensland who was arrested for giving oil to his son with cancer. They put the kid into care, he lost a bunch of weight while in care because he couldn't eat without oil to control the nausea, and CPS blamed the weight loss on the parents and claimed neglect. Utterly bizarre. A friend of mine who's a cop woke me at 3 a.m. in the morning to tell me this story. I completely understand why. I'd be bawling my eyes out making an arrest like he did. He was called in to deal with a domestic dispute and arrested the woman because she beat the ever-loving snot out of the guy. He told me he had a broken nose and wouldn't be shocked if the guy had vision problems in one of his eyes for the rest of his life. My friend brought the woman in and she had some fresh marks as well, a couple of cuts and a solid bruise on her arm. She also had a couple of wounds that had clearly been there for a couple of days and a couple that looked like they'd just healed. My friend thinks that the man was mistreating her for the longest time and she just snapped and defended herself. The thing is, my friend's mother was subjected to similar treatment by his father, so arresting who seemed to be the overall victim broke his heart. My friends and I were in the popular haunted cemetery in the area at night to get creeped out or whatever we wanted. We came out of the woods and a forest preserve cop scared the ever-loving crap out of us by standing near the entrance in the dark and then turning on a flashlight as we approached. He brought us to his car to give us all FP curfew violations and a lecture about people getting mugged in there at night. He gets to one of my friends and as he puts his license info in, an alarm bell goes off and he quickly grabs my friend and puts him against the car and cuffs him. Turns out he had a warrant for missing court for a reckless driving ticket. Forest Preserve cop was angry our friend didn't tell him he had a warrant because A, the computer doesn't say what the warrant's for, or didn't at the time, so all they knew at first is that they have to quickly arrest him who may or may not be dangerous. And B, if he knew there was a warrant, he wouldn't have run the license. They were just trying to keep kids out of the forest preserve at night, not arrest people for traffic court violations. Poor guy's wife died a year ago, brain tumor. He's taking care of their 5-year-old son and he doesn't exactly speak the language of my country, and one day we're called because somebody parked like an idiot. Well, he'd picked up his kid from kindergarten with a 4.13 blood alcohol percentage. Didn't technically arrest him, but stripped him of his parental rights and driver's license. Probably the cops who had to arrest #eggboy in Australia for cracking an egg on the bald head of one of our senators on national television. It was after the senator announced that Muslims were to blame for the hate-fueled massacre in Christchurch's mosques. Never has there been a more deserving egging. What a true Aussie. I was arrested for revenge porn after my horrible ex-boyfriend who had physically attacked me before made a false complaint. I had to wait 7 hours in a cell before I was told there was no evidence, and another 2 before they let me go. As I was being led out, the officer accompanying me said she recommended I file a complaint or sue them as there was no reason for them to have arrested me at all. My God. My God. I wish they took that sort of allegation with as much reluctance and slow-footedness as I've heard of them using whenever a woman reports something like that has been made about her. Despite the fact that I've had to use a word for a crustacean in place of a very serious illegal filming of someone, this is such a serious problem. And I've normally seen a complete lack of legal action when women have had this kind of stuff actually made about them. So seeing somebody who hasn't made this kind of material being locked up for doing it is insane. Good of the cop to at least give you that advice. I'm a prosecutor. I was in law school working as a prosecutor for my summer job under the supervision of an assistant DA. I'm getting ready for my first trial of the summer. It's a fairly bad one. The guy was drunk and just lit a random car on fire. The fire spread to the house because it was under a connected structure. An elderly man was inside and barely escaped and was messed up from smoke inhalation. So it's my first week in the office, but my second summer, so I'm comfortable just stepping in and doing the work. My job is going to be jury selection and nothing else to get me back in the groove. In walks the defendant through the jail door into the courtroom, shackled at the wrists and ankle. I instantly recognize him. It's a guy I used to work with and had some classes with who was constantly trying to convince my college girlfriend to date him instead of me. I told my boss that I needed to recuse myself from the case, but I stuck around and watched him get convicted. Ended up talking my boss into a lighter sentence recommendation though, by vouching for his character and potential before he became an alcoholic. Ended up recommending and getting jail time plus rehab. I assume he's out by now. I got a call to a barbershop at like 4 a.m. for a woman outside who wanted her boyfriend, who she stated was on the inside, to give her house key back. She initially told me she had no way to get into her house because her boyfriend, now ex, had the key and so she needed it back. She also decided it was a good time to tell me he had a felony warrant. I ran him and sure enough he had one. I felt bad for her so I started to pound on the front door of this barbershop. I knew he probably wasn't going to answer so I yelled something about how if he didn't open up, I'd report the barbershop to our problem properties unit for having someone sleeping overnight in the business. Sure enough, he comes to the door and opens it up. I immediately recognize him as a janitor at one of the grocery stores I frequented while working midnights, as it was the only thing open to get food. He was always really cool with me and seemed like a really hard-working guy. He explains to me that he has no key of hers, and the only reason she's there is because she knows he has a warrant and she just wants him to go to jail. He said he planned on turning himself in soon, but just wanted to get some things straightened out first with his kids. Unfortunately, I'd already run his information on my car computer, so I had no choice but to arrest him for the warrant. I felt so terrible, but he was very understanding. I sit him in my patrol car, and while another officer watched him, I went to go and speak with her again. I tell her I wasn't able to get a key, so she'd have to find another way to get inside the house. She tells me that's okay, she has a spare one. I ask for her information now and go to run her, and I'm praying to whatever God is out there that she also has any kind of warrant, as I was going to arrest her too if she did. But she doesn't, and she gets to go on her merry way. On the way down to intake, I asked the guy why he had to come to the door. He said it was his friend's barbershop and he didn't want him to get in trouble over this drama. I felt so bad because I had to tell him I was just bluffing and none of that would have happened. I still feel terrible to this day. There was a couple that lived in my district that I knew from outside of work. I happened to know the guy had cheated on his wife and was all round just a smarmy jerk. The wife was a respected member of the community with a prominent job. The couple also had a young son and were members of the local church. One day, a domestic disturbance gets called out at their residence. Guy was being a butthead and got into an argument with her. She gets frustrated enough that she punches him in the face and he calls the cops. He says he doesn't want to press charges, just wants us to separate everyone and keep the peace. Wife does what every good Christian is raised to do and tells the truth. Our state has a mandatory arrest law if probable cause is found for any domestic violence crime. Unfortunately, that meant we had to take this sweet, otherwise law-abiding lady to jail. I mean, at least the bad guys have the good sense to lie to us. Well, to play devil's advocate here, she does deserve to go to jail over that. She did attack him. We wouldn't hesitate if the roles were switched, right? If he just got frustrated enough and attacked her, he'd deserve to definitely go to jail, even though she didn't press charges. We need to change our whole mentality about this, because this kind of domestic assault can also be done by women. I do realize that this was a good lawful arrest and that the wife, in this case, committed a crime. Also, mandatory arrests for DV are a good thing. This situation was unique in that I knew the couple socially before and I knew the emotional wringer this guy was putting her through. The point of the story is that it was difficult on an emotional level to have to arrest someone I knew with that kind of backstory. I'm a former host and translator for a cruise liner. Once had to translate for our security officer as he expelled a French gay couple from the ship for beating a German woman up for reserving chairs at an empty lounge. It had a sign telling people not to reserve seats. The one thing they don't tell you when you get hired as a translator is people often get mad at you, not the guy who's giving the actual orders. I've never heard so much cursing in French as I did that day. My godmother is a single mum of 4. and I think by now she has 5. I don't know how the frick it happened, but somebody called immigration on her. ICE shows up to arrest her. All of her kids have different dads, and who the frick knew where any of them were? So Child Protection Services is called, and you have mum being led away by ICE and 4 kids being dragged away by CPS. The youngest was 6. When did kids with crayons at your restaurant blow everybody's minds? I once drew a very detailed, by crayon standards anyway, diagram of a sea cucumber when I was a wee lad, and I watched the busboy just crumple my masterpiece up with all the other garbage and toss it away. My niece was always quite the drama queen. About 9 years ago, we were eating at a restaurant, and I saw her drawing a lovely landscape. It was adorable watching her draw a sun wearing sunglasses, grass, flowers, and a tombstone. Concerned, I asked what she was drawing. She said, "It's me. We waited so long here that I died." She's an even more dramatic teenager now. God help me. I work as a waiter in Harvester. An 8 to 10-year-old boy simply wrote, "Mum is a butthole" on one of our drawing pads. This one kid, about 5 or 6, drew a very detailed picture of 2 people doing the deed. His parents didn't even acknowledge it. They drew an animal with 2 heads directly onto the table. I asked them what it was supposed to be, and apparently it was their pet dog. Parents offered no explanation on why their pet had 2 heads or why they let their kid draw on the table in the first place. So I showed the kid how he could use a wet wipe as an eraser. When I was in college, my much older sister invited me to dinner at this Italian restaurant with her husband and friends. I knew nobody. I was a nerdy college student, and my sister worked as a dentist, and my brother-in-law was a banker. I had no conversation connections to them or their friends. After sitting awkwardly quiet for several minutes, I noticed crayons on the table. I picked them up and colored a random rainbow design on the butcher paper tablecloth. None of the other dinner guests acknowledged my drawing. I just doodled and doodled as they discussed the adult world. Soon, the waiter came over to refresh our drinks. He noticed my rainbow doodle and immediately started to fawn over my design. Now, this is a fabulous piece of art. We are going to display this masterpiece on the big fridge in our kitchen. He then takes the butcher paper and tears it into 2 sections. He takes my weird little drawing back to the kitchen with him, and this is the moment when my sister leans over to me and whispers, "The waiter thinks you're mentally handicapped." I was so embarrassed. I mean, your first clue probably should have been that nobody in history has ever told a fully abled adult that they're going to put their art on the refrigerator. If you make something really cool, maybe they'll frame it and put it on their wall or something. In any case, I felt the embarrassment from this one radiate through my screen, and my sympathies are with you. There used to be a restaurant in the town I went to college in that was basically a knockoff of Applebee's called Garfield's. It had paper strewn across all the tables and crayons so the waitstaff could write their names down for the customers, and the customers could write whatever they wanted. I was in there one afternoon with my girlfriend when the mother and daughter in the booth behind us decided to leave without paying for their meal. The waitress was at first angry, but then began laughing when she realized that they'd written down their real names repeatedly in crayon all over the table. They were caught by the police less than an hour later, according to the police report. Man, Garfield's. We had one in my hometown. My now husband and I used to go there and write goofy things to each other on the tabletop. One evening he proposed to me by writing, "Will you marry me?" on our table. We've got a lot of good memories in Garfield's. The kids played a game of hangman. The stick figure was fully hanged, and the word they used was my first name. The face on the hanged man had eyes and a straight line for a mouth. It was sort of creepy. To hopefully erase away some of that creepiness, as someone who's worked with kids quite a bit, they're terrible at coming up with ideas for hangman. The amount of times I've played with them and I'm able to find the words somewhere in the room is astounding. One of them probably just read your name tag or something and decided to use that. It's still hilarious and slightly ominous, though. Not something a kid drew, but a funny story. I went to greet my table once and the parents asked me to take the red crayon. Only the red one, because their daughter will eat red crayons and not any other colors. Just red. The red one tastes the best. She didn't leave a drawing, but I had an 8-year-old take the entire order for the kids' table in purple crayon for about 7 kids and herself. She told me she had aspirations to be a waitress. Unfortunately, I trusted her order and she got it slightly wrong. Hopefully she's contemplated other career options. Her drawing's still on my fridge though. A family bought some extremely loud toys with them to a nice restaurant. It was a macaroni grill, cheesecake factory style sort of place. Patrons around them complained because they had 3 kids who each had 1 or 2 extremely loud toys, like a car with a police siren, there was a kid's megaphone, kid's boombox with animal sounds, stuff like that. My manager came over and offered to relocate them, and they refused. He gave them a free appetizer but said they'd have to put the toys away, and the kids proceeded to draw at least 5 pictures of my manager getting murdered by jungle cats, tanks, a game of hangman, death incarnate, and some other random stuff. When they left the pictures on the table. My manager proceeded to show every employee in the restaurant, all the while laughing himself to death. We got them framed for him for Christmas. Some little kid wrote #FreeTubbySmith. One time, this really sweet little girl said she drew me a picture and not to look at it until after she left. It was folded up on the table. So I walked over after she leaves, and she had written in crayon really big, "You are gay." I died laughing and I kept it. Child about 7 wrote, "I own this restaurant now." Well, it's written, what can you do about it? I'm not a waiter, but my daughter at 5 colored a picture of Abraham Lincoln, her school's name, and gave the president red lips. My husband calls it Babraham Lincoln, and it's still on our refrigerator. She's 7 now. Years ago, small town, a doctor and his wife with their 3 very well-behaved boys came in for dinner. I used to love this family, always polite and ordered well. The 2nd or 3rd time taking care of them, I was taking their orders when their youngest, no older than 8, handed me a piece of paper from his Blue's Clues notebook. Scrawled in very legible writing, in red crayon was, "May I have a plate of bacon, please?" And yes, he even drew a strip of bacon. The word poop over and over. I love it when I see little kid graffiti. It's always something like butts or something that they think is edgy. I mean, my nephew wrote poo on a paper plate and hid it under my sister's pillow. He blamed it on his dad. This is kind of related. I'm a librarian, and we keep pencils and paper all over the library for people to write call numbers on when they're looking for books. I always find and keep notes with art or weird writing in them. One of my favorites is a note that had 1 word on it: cannibalism. One favorite art picture was a picture of Pikachu with a heart on its tail, and it said something like, "I'm a girl, deal with it." They drew the family undressed in the swimming pool. I'm a parent, not a server, but my 6-year-old son has drawn pictures of our waitresses and given them to our servers on multiple occasions. He always draws them with big eyes, long lashes, and a happy smile. When he gives them to the server, he always compliments them on something: their hair, their jewelry, the color of their nails, stuff like that. In short, my son has more swagger at 6 than I've had my whole life. Yeah, how come when this kid hands women stick figure drawings of themselves it's appreciated, but when I do it they tell me I'm banned from coming back to the bank? Double standards are ridiculous, man. In high school I worked at a breakfast restaurant named after Humpty Dumpty. Had a kid artistically rendition a Humpty coloring page into what he titled Smackhead Humpty, complete with a pipe and bloodshot eyes. A bit of a masterpiece, really. We should have framed it. There was a wall of kids' drawings at my local Five Guys, and some kid had written, "Five Guys makes me poop." I was in a bar that acted as a community cafe during the day, so the walls were decorated with children's drawings, mostly pages from coloring books. There was one freehand picture among the badly scribbled-in Elsas and Spider-Man. It was a blobby 4-legged potato man with the word "No" written in large crooked letters above it. Then I flicked the drawing over, and in the same handwriting, just the word "Die." It really tickled me. Not a waitress, but the parent. My daughter drew a dolphin and a whale swimming together. Looked like 2 male organs having an arm wrestling match. Oh, I kept this one for a very long time. A 6 or 7-year-old girl drew me pictures of the separate components of blood: red and white blood cells, platelets, and plasma. It was real cool, but different. An adorable little girl came up to me and asked for empty pictures. It took me a while to realize that she meant blank paper. I had to take a moment to get myself back together because the concept of her thinking that the papers were pictures which hadn't been drawn yet almost brought me to tears. I was a waitress at a sushi restaurant, and last summer, a kid gave to me a drawing of a green sushi tank that was firing glitter. I thought it was brilliant, actually. I hope that kid becomes a creative adult. There was a coloring page that was of a little girl holding a dog. The little girl who colored it in, who was 4, drew a rope around the girl's neck, and the only color she put on the girl was making her face purple. We still have it hung up behind the bar, out of the sight of customers. Sometimes I look at the picture and worry about that little girl, and sometimes I just laugh. There were a couple of teenagers, and it was a Five Guys. Two people came in and ordered, looking clearly out of it like they were, shall we say, medicated or on something. And later we found one of the index cards that said, "I've been up for 5 days on crystal, and I ate a Five Guys burger and felt okay." I call that a decent review. I'd give crayons to almost anybody if they seemed like the type that would enjoy it. I loved giving crayons to first dates, it always went really well. One time I was bussing the table after this elderly couple left, and the wife had drawn a very detailed, anatomically correct male organ. Like superbad Jonah Hill eggplant drawings level of dedication to the craft. A magnificent, veiny pillar drawn by this unassuming little old woman while her husband sat across the table. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. As a kid, I had this whole made-up story world with humanoid cats, and I used to write books on the computer about them. They were stored and password protected on hidden floppy disks, and at around 9 I learned the hard way that crappy dad didn't even respect even a tiny bit of my privacy, so he'd go through my diaries, even the locked ones, and then make fun of me. I'd draw detailed pictures of all the characters. I have different outfit pictures drawn for different occasions, like a princess dress versus the character's adventure clothes. I had a couple of characters that I'd always draw on coloring pages or the paper table coverings when we went out to eat. They were often accompanied by short stories if I had time. I'd made servers drawings of themselves as cat people more than once. My mum ended up letting me draw one of the characters to get added to a mural she was having painted in the nursery for my, at the time, unborn sister. My uncle was a professional artist, and he did this gorgeous fairy tale castle mural. He basically traced my drawing of my princess cat onto transfer paper and put it right on the wall, and then helped me paint it in. It's a really nice memory. At Five Guys, I saw some kid's crayon drawing hanging on the wall that said, "I love Five Guys in my mouth." I was a hostess. At 9 years old, a kid drew himself as a pizza chef with, "Give me my fricking seat," lovingly written next to it. I think I have it on my computer somewhere. My ex always used to draw what he referred to as urban art, which consisted of an undressed lady with her legs spread with a bag over her head. He passed it off as something that my 2-year-old had drawn one time and proceeded to horrify our waitress, who probably had 20 employees over to see it, and we were asked to leave. And that's probably the least offensive situation he's ever put me in. I simply cannot imagine why he's your ex now. A picture of me with the following captions: "Our waitress," "Nerd," and "Can I take your order?" Which I didn't even say. A very sweet, quiet, polite boy that was a serving dream. I laughed so hard when I lifted his plate and found that. It was like 15 years ago and I still have it somewhere. Family of 8 sitting next to me. The kid drawing is a chubby toddler making noises while scribbling on his paper kids menu. His mum asks him, "What are you drawing, sweetie?" And he replies in this old mannish rasp, "I gotta draw my own damn milkshake because it's taking too long." The family lost it while the mum scolded him. When I was about 7, I wrote my home phone number on the table because I thought my waitress was cute. She called the number thinking my dad wrote it. And no, don't know how she mixed up a 7-year-old's handwriting with a 40-year-old's. My mum answered the phone and accused my dad of cheating. After hearing them yell at each other for a while, I finally told them the truth. Needless to say, they still laugh about it and at me to this day. Oh boy. So was your dad just a really hot guy? Was he putting out flirty vibes? And more importantly, was your mum there in the restaurant while this was happening? There are any number of factors that make this just that little bit funnier and weirder to think about. You're probably old enough to call back that number if you have caller ID. Not super weird, but memorable. When I was a waiter in college, I had a table of 2 that consisted of a mum in her mid to late 30s and her 9-year-old son. The kid had a set of markers and a sketch pad. He was writing what I thought was a nickname as a graffiti tag over and over. It was D Nice. Honestly, the kid was pretty talented for a 9-year-old kid, and I complimented him on his artistic flair and asked his name, thinking if this was a D name like Derek or David or something. But he said it was Brett. So I asked what his tag stood for then, and he said it was because his mum's name was Denise, and D Nice was his tag as a tribute to her because he loved her. I thought that was awesome. I'll never forget Brett, and I hoped he tagged his mum's name all over the place when he got older. I was in the waiting area of a local Mexican restaurant for my very, very late date to show up. I was dinking around on my phone when the only other person in the room, a little girl of about 4, started talking to me. Her mum was a server there and her dad was a cook. She hung out in that waiting area, kind of like a small living room, and colored when her parents worked the same shift. At one point, I saw her scribble a name at the top and sprint off to the kitchen saying, "I'm going to give this to someone, watch my stuff." And I did. She came back a minute later, dragging her feet and still holding the ripped-out page of her coloring book. "She said she already has too many from today," she said sullenly. "Well, I didn't get one," I replied. "Oh, what's your name?" She put her crayon down to the page as if to write my name, but must have gotten impatient since she crossed out the other name and handed it to me. She was so proud, she went and told the original recipient that the picture had found a home anyway. My date arrived as the little girl came back, so I said goodbye and tucked the picture away to avoid the mole sauce. I still have that somewhere. In short, I received a masterpiece. I remember overhearing some mother tell her kid, "Oh no, you've got to color him in a real skin color," after he'd colored the kid in the picture brown. Tangentially related, in college I hung out with a nerdy crowd, and I mean even by internet standards. We were music majors and enjoyed going to Macaroni Grill, as that restaurant gives crayons to everyone and uses drawing paper rather than tablecloths. Also, it was better Italian food than Olive Garden, which in turn was better by miles than what we normally had on campus. We had a game where, once we'd placed our orders, we had until the food came to use the crayons to write a snippet of a composition, and then we'd have each other perform it once we got back to the dorms. We were so nerdy, this was actually fun, and became a monthly tradition that spread outside of our little circle. Not at a restaurant, but my girlfriend's daughter made a pretty interesting drawing the other day and hung it up on the fridge. It was a stick figure holding what appeared to be a severed head in one hand, complete with a smiley face and what appeared to be a neck hanging off. I saw it and asked her to tell me all about it. Turns out the severed head was actually an ice cream cone. Reminded me that kids see this world entirely differently than adults. Once on my way out of a restaurant, I walked by a family that had a little guy like maybe 7 years old, and he was putting the finishing touches on the Wu-Tang logo drawn in yellow crayons on his kid's menu sheet. Awesome kid. At least it looked like the Wu-Tang logo. I choose to believe that's what he was drawing. At Applebee's with my ex and her kid. I'd already given up on the relationship and life at that point, so I said, "F it, let's go to Applebee's." Her 5-year-old boy spent the first 10 minutes we were there alternating between spilling orange soda and scribbling on the placemat/child distraction device. After a meal that failed to meet my even already abysmally low expectations, we trudged out. As I was leaving a wadded $5 bill for our tip, I noticed that the kid had drawn a giant purple male anatomy with a speech bubble saying, "Rawr." It even had testes. Had someone draw a really, really detailed and frankly impressive furry smut on the back of a menu. I actually kept that for a while. Every time my husband and I went to a restaurant and had nice leftovers of any kind, we'd always get a box to take home. Usually it was my entire entree, because by the time I ate salad and bread, I wasn't hungry any longer. With 4 teenage daughters at home, however, I never got to enjoy my entree the next day. One of them would always get into the box and pick it clean. So one night, my husband found some crayons laying on the restaurant table and marked the takeout box in big letters, "Stool sample." Nobody touched my dinner that night, but he got some really disgusted looks from other customers as he was walking through Outback Steakhouse with that box. I'm just a dentist, not a waiter. In my waiting room, we have coloring books for the kids. One day, a patient informed us of some of the pictures in said books. Pages and pages of Alvin and the Chipmunks with exposed women's chests and male members. Also, various vulgar words. We hung them in the break room for a laugh. Haha, I mean, I misread that you hung them up in the waiting room for a second there, and what you actually did is far more preferable. I can imagine that while some would have appreciated the artwork, it may not have helped you retain customers. They just drew a single, hyper-realistic eye. Scrawled on the table, menu, various napkins, and anything else they could reach, "I love Jake Paul, Jake Paul, Jake Paul, I will marry you, Jake Paul, love, love, not Logan, only Jake." She was also given an iPhone during the meal and a healthy dose of parental neglect during the time they were there. I was bussing and found a comic 2 little girls had drawn. Panel 1 was a girl being asked out by a man named Bob. In panel 2, she rejects him, and in panel 3, Bob has disappeared. Panel 4, they search Bob's house and they find Bob on a noose and it says, "Oh no, Bob ended himself." Weird as F. I'm not a waiter, just an older sibling. We went to a restaurant that let you draw on the tablecloth. My sister drew an elephant, and then my 8-year-old brother drew a blimp holding it up. Then for good measure, he drew a massive symbol of the Third Reich on the blimp. We'd just watched Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. He got a firm talking to and a bit of a history lesson as well. When I was a kid, I had to go to church twice every Sunday. I'd entertain myself drawing. I must have been a twisted 6-year-old because I'd often draw pictures of dismembered bodies, like a guy with his legs chopped off, with a little circle in the middle where the bone was chopped. Thankfully, I didn't turn into a psycho killer or anything. I just grew up and forgot about this weirdness. More than 35 years later and 1,000 miles away, I was sitting in church and saw a folded-up piece of paper. I opened it and there was a picture of a dismembered body obviously drawn by a child. I was like, "Aww." Some little girl drew what was obviously supposed to be Jesus and blood raining down, and it said, "The Rampster is coming." And it made me laugh because of the misspelling, but it was also terrifying. He drew a fake Kmart sales circular with the tagline, "Michael Jackson sale, boys' pants half off." And let's say some of the pictures of said pants half off left little to the imagination. What unethical practices do a lot of schools follow that mess up your kids? Bullied or persecuted students having the same repercussions as their bully for defending themselves. All it does is enforce the idea of, I'm going to get suspended anyway, may as well make it worth it. It does the exact opposite of what's intended. Our assembly room and gymnasium had the fire escape doors chained shut and the police department was aware of it. You should call the fire department next time, they will burn that crap down themselves. Figuratively, of course. One of the few people you don't want to mess with is the fire marshal. Requiring you to purchase textbooks brand new from the college's bookstore because that's the only way to get the access code to complete the required assignment on the publisher's website. Less severe, but limiting kids' access to water, as in you can't have your drink bottle at the table, which sucks when you live in Australia and at summer the temperatures get up to 36 degrees Celsius and school is during all the hottest hours of the day. I was a decently misbehaved third grader. I told my teacher I had a stomachache and I needed to go to the nurse. I asked a number of times. She thought I was just trying to get out of individual reading time, and my appendix burst on the bus ride home. I was never one to ask to go to the nurse, just a hyperactive kid that my teacher apparently had had enough of. Denying medical attention to an 8-year-old seems unethical. This is not a boy who cried wolf story for all those saying, "I told you so." I had a bully in middle school grab and twist my thumb hard enough to snap a tendon. Or whatever it is in your thumb, it's been a while, and nothing happened to him since he'd have to sit out football if he was punished. Passing students that aren't ready for the next grade because they need to pad their passing rates to keep funding. It's setting the kids up for failure down the road. Giving preference to kids that parents donate money and fraternize with teachers and headmasters. The person that bullied me was the child of the school board governor. The head teacher decided to sit both of us kids down to talk it out, and she burst into crocodile tears and told them I was the one hurting her. Guess which one of us got believed and which one got yelled at. Yep, pays to have important parents. Yeah, that's a kid who's learning all the wrong lessons in life. Bully, lie, and rely on mummy and daddy to get you out of any of the consequences of your actions. Great job, everyone. Good job. Everyone go home. Firing lunchroom staff for serving food to the poor students whose families can't afford to pay. Only having one bathroom open in high school. There's thousands of kids. This was the deal for us for a little bit last semester. We had a whole devious lick thing going around, and it eventually got to the point that the only restroom that was open was the one near the auditorium. The walk from the classroom to that particular restroom could be 2 to 3 minutes, depending on where the class was. And they were always crowded, yet teachers would still expect us to only take a little while. Underdeveloped gifted programs. Oh, you got through your work quickly? Here's more. Add a couple puzzles. We aren't going to teach you how to study or teach you the social skills that gifted kids often lack. We're just going to tack on more work and stress you out. Good luck in college without those study skills we didn't teach you. My daughter's best friend was running track, and the coaches were yelling at her to run more laps. She told them her legs were hurting really badly, so they yelled at her and told her to run another lap. She started crying because of the pain and ended up falling down and breaking both kneecaps. As she lay there screaming, the coaches didn't even come to help her. One of the kids had to call 911, and when they showed up, the coaches acted like they didn't know what to do with the situation. To make it worse, my daughter was on the volleyball and track team, and they tried to do the same to her, but I went up to the school and went off at the principal and coaches about pushing the kids too hard, just so the coaches could win their games. I sent my daughter to rehab for her leg issues, and they said her legs were stressed and the coaches were overworking her. So I'll be taking this up with the school superintendent. Not letting kids go to the toilet when they need to. I distinctly remember one kid in my German class bursting into tears because he just couldn't hold it any longer. He asked at least 3 times. My parents always told me that if I absolutely can't hold it any longer, and a teacher is still telling me no, to just walk to the bathroom and go. Then text my parents with what happened, so if I got in trouble they could back me up. You can get a bladder infection for holding it too long, and it's just ridiculous not to let a student go to the restroom. This is at a university level. Say you're a grad student who just secured an opportunity to travel internationally with university funding for your research. You put in a travel request with a suggested travel and lodging budget that gets approved within your funding. You, the grad student, still have to front the money no matter how much it is, and reimbursement can take 3 weeks to 3 months depending on how much pressure the finance office is under. They operate on a first-in, first-out basis. So, you secured this wonderful grant for thousands of dollars, making no to little money as a grad student, and maybe you're even a fully funded student paying no tuition. You still might be too poor to actually conduct the research you were brought there to do. Awarding perfect attendance, encouraging kids to go to school while sick is pretty unethical if you ask me. My school had exemptions, meaning if you had perfect attendance each semester, you got to skip 2 of your final exams. 1 or 2 absences or tardies and you got 1 skip. More than that, you had to take them all. We were all sick all the time because nobody could bear to give up their exemptions. Not letting kids go to the bathroom. God forbid you're a kid with a small bladder or a teen girl. In 5th grade, I had this teacher who told me I couldn't go to the bathroom unless I said out loud what I was going to do. But that was so embarrassing to me. I told her no, but she only laughed and said, "Well, guess you don't want to go then." Guess who ended up peeing herself while running out the door? My dad was less than understanding, and those were my new denim shorts as well. Bullied students are told to leave because it's easier to kick out a quiet victim than a loud bully. Lowering a school's funding if the SAT scores are low. If the scores are low, there should be more funding to help kids learn. I had a student who never showed up and never did any work in my class. The principal asked me to change his F to a 75. I emailed back explaining that the student never made an effort and stuff like that. He told me to be a part of the team and do as I was told. I was only a second-year teacher and was afraid of losing my job, so I obliged. Same principal, a couple of years later, we had a very large student, and as she walked down the bus ramp one day, some boys called out the bus window the filthy things they wanted to do to her, while also calling her fat. I wrote them up and chewed them out. When the principal read the referral, he simply said, "Well, boys will be boys," and tore up the referral. To this day, I wish I would have asked him what he would have done if that was done to one of his daughters, but I was so shocked. It still boils my blood. The same thing happened to me as a teacher. I stuck to my principles and lost my job. A good thing in hindsight, but it was devastating to me at the time. Collective punishment. 1 or 2 pupils misbehave and the entire class gets punished for it. In the case of there being a fire, I think it's stupid that we have to go in alphabetical order. So Adam is happy and healthy, but Zach just turned into ash. In my opinion, they should all just get in a line no matter what. The worst? Probably the sky-high cost of attendance. The most visible evidence of this is the endless list of administrators, administrative assistants, specialists, administrative associates, and the list goes on. Unless you're dirt poor and qualify for Pell Grants in the US, the cost of a name-brand school is hard to swallow. Add inflation and it's even worse. If a bully starts a fight and you defend yourself, you get suspended for fighting. If a bully starts a fight with you and you do nothing to defend yourself, you get suspended for fighting. If you run from a bully to avoid a fight, you still risk being suspended for fighting. This is why I beat the poop out of a bully when I was in the 8th grade. I figured that if I was going to be suspended for the actions of someone whom I couldn't control, I might as well earn it myself. Yeah, I get the feeling that zero-tolerance bullying will once again be making many repeat appearances in one of our videos. If your school rule is making kids go, well, when I fight back I should probably just try to hurt them back as badly as possible, and you aren't rethinking your stance, there's a problem. Making school start at 7 a.m. and the bus route comes by your house before 6:30. So you have to get up around 5:30 to 6 a.m. every morning. Then, say you have an extracurricular activity that takes at least 2 hours, but if it's a sports game, it's probably closer to at least 4 hours. Then let's say you have a test tomorrow as well as some homework, so you study or work for at least 2 hours. At this point, you've spent well over half your day doing school-related activities. If you want to get a full 8 hours sleep, which is unlikely, that leaves you about 2 hours of free time per day, which a good chunk of it is probably spent eating a meal, showering, getting ready for the next day and stuff. And then people are surprised when teenagers are always tired, depressed, and anxious. Schools are screwed. When I was in school, they could still revoke bathroom breaks, and some teachers still did it even after they made it illegal to ban them. Additionally, in my time, for an entire year, through 7th grade, I only had 1 hour of recess that entire year, because my special ed teacher felt that recess, which was mandatory by law, was a distraction. So what she'd do is punish us so we couldn't take it. This caused a lot of stress and trauma, and then she even prohibited bathroom breaks. Looking back, I really wish my parents had sued. Well, I don't know about other schools, but when I came forward about a female classmate constantly crossing my physical boundaries and verbally bullying me, they shrugged their shoulders and asked if I tried saying no. I'm also female, by the way. She got away with doing it to 2 of my friends and another guy in her grade. She claimed some pretty damning things about that guy, so she got transferred to my stagecraft class. Mind you, she made claims like that constantly, to the point where I was sure she was histrionic because she made a lot of, shall we say, adult comments and stuff like that, all the time, also threatening self-deletion when I told her I didn't want to date her. Our teacher shrugged his shoulders and said, "Oh, okay." Went to the counselor and she told me, "Well, have you tried saying no?" Gee, why didn't I think of that? The last straw was when this girl touched my butt in front of everyone in class, as in poked me while I was bent over working on an assignment. I went up to her, told her to F off, and she never spoke to me again. Instead, moved on to one of my best friends. So in short, my school's unethical practice was not taking stuff like this seriously. Women can be intimidated or victimized, just like men can, and it should be taken seriously regardless of the gender of either of the kids in question. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Bit of a niche one, this one. My school's gym teacher not only didn't stop bullying, but openly supported it because apparently, them little soft, sensitive Fs need to be taught how rough the real world is. And he'd cheer on the bullies when he saw them beating up other students. "Well, good gym teachers are hard to find here, so he's staying," was the school's answer to this. Humiliating or calling out students in front of the whole class. Also saying things like, "You'll never pass my class or get into Harvard or get into college," to the entire class for some reason, always with a stupid, arrogant smirk on their face. The first 2 are true stories. The first from my Honours Algebra 2 class to a class of 15 and 16-year-olds, and the second from my Honours school to a class of 14 and 15-year-olds, which was supposed to prepare me for that exact thing. What makes the second even worse is that the person who said it was, wait for it, the school counselor. Closing every single bathroom because of one fight in a bathroom. We have 28 bathrooms in our school, all of them closed. We are also the school who made it to international news for throwing out kids' school lunches for being too much in debt to the school. Most good colleges chase rankings to the detriment of the student body. There's also been an abandonment from state schools to provide affordable education to everyone in the state. Having worked in a private school for 16 years, I've got so many answers to this, but I'll limit them to the following 4. Stating in the shiny brochure given to parents that any possession or use of substances means instant expulsion, and then allowing students with substances to return after a 2-week suspension. The only kid at my former workplace who was expelled over substances, and it happened because they stole the money they used to buy them. Then there's telling students that if they defended themselves from local bullies, they'd be suspended. This rule was dropped after a student ended up being pushed into a river after having their nose broken. Then there's letting students sleep in dorms where the walls are riddled with damp because there's, quote, no money in the budget for repairs, while finding the funds to do a full refurb on the toilets in the school auditorium right before the visit of a member of the royal family. And finally, treating male and female students differently. Case in point, a female student got caught performing a down-under kiss on a male student who was moved to a new school, while the boy was allowed to remain where he was. I thought it was pretty weird that 5th through 8th grade at my school didn't have any bathrooms. At all. Also, when I was younger, a mentally disabled kid wouldn't stop making moves on me, so I screamed, the kid started crying and told the teacher I wouldn't be his friend, and I ended up getting yelled at and the teacher said I was being snotty. I got into trouble for making him cry, and he apparently didn't know any better, so I wasn't allowed to scream or yell, according to the teacher, no matter what that kid did to me. Yeah, I really hope it's changed since then. That was in the mid to late 90s. Just about every school is hierarchical and teaches kids to never question authority, in this case the teacher or principal. Teachers are on occasion incorrect or may poorly explain things, and school policy can sometimes be profoundly unjust. It is heavily indoctrinated that children should never question these things, and it's often punished when they do. This leads to people growing up with a very unhealthy hierarchical approach to just about all aspects of life. Too much homework. Let kids be kids. A little homework is good, but God, don't drown the kids in it. We have to stand outside for however long the school wants us to. The longest has been up to an hour. In the winter, in silence, and without coats. Okay, so the average comment in this grouping was made about 4 years ago, and I want to know what in the frick school was getting away with this sort of borderline corporal punishment in 2021. Like, surely if this is in the States, as most of these stories are, this is a lawsuit waiting to happen. Wild. Over-the-top dress code making girls feel like crap because of it. Tormenting socially awkward or introverted students. Not allowing kids to drink water. Like, bro, no discipline is being inculcated by making me thirst in a place where I'm supposed to pay attention to the board. Dress code policing, specifically for girls, especially for girls. It's demeaning, and I say that as a man. Not allowing people to go to the washroom. One of my friends literally started crying because he had to go and the teacher was going to cut attendance if he put a step outside class. She eventually obliged, but man, what a witch. Convincing kids that a 4-year institution after graduation is the best choice for everyone, no exceptions. Not so much a school problem, but kind of related. When I was in 1st grade, a couple of 3rd graders cornered me and started saying things like, "Your mum doesn't love you and will abandon you at school," which isn't so bad, but 6-year-old me was devastated. I told my teacher that I was being bullied at recess, and she asked what grade the bullies were in. I didn't know at the time, and I guessed that they were in 2nd. She pretty much responded, "I highly doubt that any of them would do that, but I'll look into it." A little while later, she approached me and told me to stop lying. 7 a.m. classes in complete disregard for what the science says about adolescent development and sleep schedule and the effect of early classes on academic success. Zero tolerance, which at this point is just an excuse not to investigate anything. Making all the girls walk into a classroom and get down on their knees in front of their male classmates to measure our uniform skirts to make sure they're not too short and up to code. Extremely frickin' humiliating as middle schoolers and completely uncalled for. For clarification, the boys didn't measure our skirt lengths, the teachers did. However, instead of bringing us into an empty classroom or just not doing it at all, they'd bring us into populated classrooms with many boys present and do the measurements there. Oh, I so rarely get to tell this story, but I was in a school when the whole yoga pant thing was a craze hit. Are they pants or tights? My school decided that they weren't tights and weren't allowed. One day a girl came in wearing something that looked like tights or jeans, jeggings I think. She said they were skinny jeans. Important, this girl is 16. Well, the male principal got a male teacher, told the underage girl to stand still so the male teacher could run his hands up and down her legs to see if they really were jeans. The girl flips her lid and just starts screaming at both of them. Then she called her dad and told him what they wanted to do. Her father immediately raced to the school and rained hellfire on all of them. Suddenly, nobody cared if you wore yoga pants or not. UK here, maybe not quite on the same track as some of the answers, but basically schools forcing university as the only option after leaving school. Never mind college, apprenticeships, going straight into a job or things like that. They don't want to hear about it unless it's a university. I've even seen schools making students pay and apply for a university even when they've got offers at college or accepted as an apprenticeship. I presume it's because the more students that get offered a place at university, then the better the statistics are, and that seems to be a huge focus, unfortunately, these days. Oh my word, so many to choose from, so here is a short list. First, segregating special education students into what are called Special Class with Integration Rooms, or SKIN rooms. The idea is that the student has a home base and can receive instruction from his or her special education teacher on difficult subjects and then be integrated into the regular flow of school for the rest of the classes. How it actually works is they keep the special ed kids in there all the time and let them out for physical education, sometimes lunch if they don't have their own lunch period, and for classes that can't be taught in special ed classrooms like the arts. You'll usually find these classrooms tucked away by the boiler room or in the basement if your school has one, or otherwise out of the regular flow of school traffic. And the second is zero-tolerance policies. They encourage kids to inflict higher levels of harm since the consequences will be the same. Why shouldn't they just absolutely beat the crap out of the other kid? The street cred alone is worth it. Letting failing students move forward. Assigning 300 problems worth of math homework every night that takes 5 to 10 minutes to write out. On top of that, teachers don't coordinate, so they all decide to give 1 to 3 hours worth of homework per night and somehow expect students to complete it all and to not be sleep deprived when they come in the next day. Also, punishing the victims of bullying when they fight back. Seriously, may the fleas of 1,000 camels feast upon you for the rest of your days. How sports programs have way more money than any other programs at the school because apparently school is a business, not education. Selling twice the number of parking passes than spots actually exist for, despite 10 blocks around the school being no parking zones, and then imposing steep parking fines. Keeping bad teachers in their positions, not the same as a good teacher with poorly performing students with bad home lives and stuff. Making kids have to pay for their lunches. I grew up where some students paid full, some paid reduced, and some didn't pay at all, depending on the family's income. If you didn't pay, you got a sandwich with 4 slices of cheese and that was all. But honestly, nobody should have to pay at all for their school lunch. The Pledge of Allegiance. Honestly, it seems like such a fascist practice to the outside observer. Then there's confiscating kids' phones, withholding graduation ceremonies because they've labeled kids as troublemakers, zero-tolerance policies, ignoring and covering up bullying. Making kids sell magazines or whatever should be 100% illegal, and I don't know what kind of parents stand up for that bullcrap. Holding your records and diploma because your parents are behind in payments. I went to a very good but expensive private school, which my parents could consistently pay for when I was very young, but struggled after 2008. When they'd be behind in payments, the school would hold my grades sheet from my parents, so I could never see the comments my teachers would have about me. Finally, at my graduation ceremony, I couldn't have access to my diploma nor my grades, which I needed to complete my college dossier, until my parents paid what they owed to the school. Of course, people should pay their dues, but messing with the students made me feel very bad. Teachers, what signs did you get that a student would go on to be a horrifying criminal? Lots of my students are in gangs. A few have been arrested for some pretty serious stuff, including popping or shanking people. Sad to say, but at an inner-city school, I'm not entirely shocked when kids from our district are in the paper for any sort of crime. The schools try to do something about it when the kids are young, but it's tough when their dads or uncles or neighbors are in gangs. Teacher of middle school here, had a weird kid. He was nice to everyone, but when nobody was watching, he'd make his hands into a strangling motion. Sometime in the year we got a pet hamster and somebody could look after it. A week later, the hamster was dead with a broken neck. When I asked who it was clear that it was the kid because of the way he looked. He looked guilty, but I said nothing as I had no evidence. Fast forward 10 years and it turns out he's in jail. What for? Shanking a mother of 2 for her purse. I've had one former student tried as an accessory to capital murder and another awaiting trial for capital murder. In both cases, the crimes were very violent and all over the news, and in both cases I wasn't that surprised when I heard about it. However, there was no time when I looked at either boy and thought, well, he's going to kill someone one day. What I did think was that they were probably going to pop off at the wrong person at some point and end up in jail or shot. Both boys were very disrespectful to both teachers and other students. They could be charming, but they had hair-trigger tempers and a great dislike of having to follow any rules. However, I've had many students like that grow out of it. I don't look at any student who's a discipline problem and automatically assume he or she will be a murderer. It sucks when it happens, though. There was this kid who went to my school all the way from age 5 to age 17. I invited him to a couple of my birthday parties in this time. At my 10th birthday party, he purposefully knocked my cake off the table before anyone could have a piece. At my 13th, he broke a window and set some paper on fire indoors. And last year he knifed and killed someone and is now in jail. Played D&D with another college student who we eventually found out was a serial killer. Well, not at the time. At the time we played D&D, he was secretly just a regular murderer. Then he didn't show up for one game and we found out that he'd knifed a few more people. There was no evil aura that the guy had, pretty average D&D nerd. But in hindsight, there were some weird things about him. That look when he'd jokingly say, "Oh, I've killed people for less." He played a female rogue, which was weird. I remember during one game, we killed a guard in a castle we were stealth storming, and we went to hide the body, and he was like, "Oh, you can get rid of the body, but there'll be too much blood to hide." You know, it's nice when people bring in their real-life experiences to help you figure out how to solve problems in the game. Okay, in seriousness, there isn't really a correlation between D&D and murder. Hashtag not all D&D players. That said, you always know the players who have murder potential. I used to work at a boarding school in England. We had a kid named Tom who came from an orphanage. Tom was one of the brightest students I ever taught. To be fair, he was actually one of my favorite students at the time, and I'm quite sure almost all the other teachers liked him too. I believed he was one of the kids who would make it in life. Not only because he was a clever student, Tom was able to be very convincing. He had great influence on other students. But in retrospect, I should have seen some signs. Quite often he stayed after class to ask some questions. One of these times, Tom showed a great interest in Horcruxes. It's obvious I haven't told him anything about it. New teacher here, and I teach elementary school, so no major crimes yet. But I've got one kid who I swear will be all over the news in future for something horrendous, be it murder or the unspeakable act or a school weapon-related tragedy. He had no empathy whatsoever. This in itself is worrying, but there are people with little empathy who turn out okay, right? Well, not this kid. He'd hurt the little girls in my class just to watch them cry. Whenever it happened, I'd rush over to the little girl, or if it was outdoor recess, the staff member outside would rush over, and he'd just be standing there staring at her with the weirdest look on his face. Not a smirk necessarily, but just odd. Most little kids will either run away or try to look innocent if you catch them, but never him. He just did not give an F. I asked him once why he was always so mean to this one little sweet girl in particular, and he said she was his favorite. I could barely contain my horrified expression. Like I said, he's going to be on the news eventually. I just hope I don't find out what he did. Well, I had a third grader this week carrying a weapon, and he threatened to shoot the security guard, though not while in possession of the thing. So yeah, we'll see in a few years how things end up for him. According to the security guard, who's ex-military, it was a real weapon, but it had been gutted and was essentially just an empty casing. When he eventually threatened that guard later, he specified he was going to get a working one from his, quote, friends. I feel bad for the kid. He scares me, but I do still feel bad. His home life is real bad, and God only knows how many Child Protection Services calls have been made at this point that haven't helped. I substituted for a home economics or cooking class for a couple of weeks. There was this one girl who struck me as a bit odd. It's hard to describe, but I got a bad vibe. She got angry really easily, had zero patience, did not respond well to authority, and would threaten anyone who annoyed her. Obnoxious, yes, but I felt like there was more to it. I asked the department head, and she told me this girl, who was about 16, was kicked out of her old school for getting into fights, and manipulating another student, a boy with a learning disability, into attempting to shank the teacher. If I see her name crop up on the news in the future, I will not be in the least bit surprised. As a teacher, there are definitely indications that something could be seriously wrong sometimes. I had one female student who was obviously giving off signs that she was ill. When she was finally diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder at the age of 13, I received a few apologies from colleagues to whom I'd expressed concerns about this child. She was expelled in 8th grade for organizing a pretty depraved plot against another girl in her class. She tried to get 4 girls to back her up. One of them turned her in to administration the day of the attempted unalivings. The victim was not knifed as she had planned, and she wasn't charged. Her mother blamed her ADHD. Really? Her mother made a point of bringing her onto campus every day after the expulsion because she had another child at the school. That mum had problems of her own. I'd hoped she wouldn't have children, but she recently gave birth to a second child. Neither child trapped the man that she was trying to get to marry her. She keeps in touch with former students and teachers through Facebook. She doesn't realize we're watching for any sign she might be a danger to these kids. I had another student ask me for help. He was planning to go on a spree against his family. He was caught by one brother doing unspeakable things to a litter of kittens. He had a bit of a history doing horrible things to animals. He asked me to help him turn himself in before he started with people. We had a conversation in which he told me I was the only adult who had ever been honest with him. I helped him. He's been institutionalized since he was 14. This child ended up in my class after being expelled from another school for bringing a knife to school to stop a girl who said he was ugly. After being suspended for having the knife, he walked to school with a 9mm intending to get to the principal. Then he became my student. We had a course mate who was intelligent, shy, and nervous. His father was a professor, and mother was a teacher. He had a friend. He tried to kill his friend's grandma with a screwdriver. Everything was planned except that he wasn't expecting resistance. He didn't succeed, luckily, and he's now serving 16 years in jail. I went to school with a girl from elementary all the way to high school graduation. Nice, maybe a little quiet, but a good student with a lot of friends and active in the school clubs and such. A few years ago, she was arrested and charged for the worst sort of the unspeakable act. Without giving away too much identifying information, they found a metric ton of evidence in her home. Thousands of photos. It made me feel ill reading the news stories. I never would have suspected it from her. My mum taught both a serial killer and a radicalized Islamic terror fighter. She said they were both decidedly weird, but no weirder than the normal weirdo students you get in every class. Bit of a switcheroo, but there was a kid in my school who stabbed me twice with a pencil when I was 8 and a scalpel when I was 15. I was sure he'd get himself into too much trouble eventually, but he's totally turned around and seems to have his life back on track. You know me, folks, I'll seize any chance I can get to have a bit of relief from the ongoing barrage of stories of broken trust and dreams and people who didn't get the help or attention they needed earlier on in life. Okay, let's plunge back into it. I taught a high school student that had a lot of impulse control issues. He was labeled EBD, or emotional behavioral disorder, in our special ed program and needed a lot of support. We got along pretty well, and I think deep down he had a good heart. But he'd fly into fits of rage when frustrated. After he graduated, I didn't hear anything about him for a year or two, and then I read in the news that he was being charged with second-degree murder after trying to settle into a family life. Apparently, the noise and demands of a busy domestic household were too much for him. I can't say that I ever thought he'd do something this terrible, but I'm not surprised that he hasn't been able to handle this situation and lost control. It's so sad because he had so much support at school, but once he left, all of that was taken away and he was on his own. I think it's tragic that all of this has happened, and I wish there had been more services in place to help him once he graduated. I went to school with a guy who got arrested after graduating for a string of crimes the narrator can't even say on YouTube. When he was in middle school, he got caught nailing animal heads to trees, so I'd say, yes, there were indicators. There was a kid at my school who wound up getting arrested and convicted for some pretty crazy stuff. He converted to Islam, aided al-Shabaab, that's the group in Somalia, and threatened the creators of South Park. When I was in high school, our chemistry teacher told us about a girl who tried to poison him by putting a chemical in his kettle. He noticed it because it made his tea blue, so there's that. Some girl also went around shanking people with a compass. Thank God none of them had any blood diseases. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My father is a high school guidance counselor. One of the kids he managed was in the news several years ago for killing his parents and taking them apart in the bathtub. My dad was totally stunned and told me that he never saw any signs in that kid. He'd apparently become a serious substance user at the time of the murders. We didn't talk about it other than that one time. Teacher here, a veteran one as well. I'm only posting here because finally a serious message can be sent, viewed, and perhaps start a change. I know which kids of mine are going to go down that path. We see signs all the time, and us good ones pick up on body language and such because it's an essential and useful tool to use. Anyhow, listen, just ask the teachers who the troubled kids are and give the public schools the gosh darn money and proper support for mental health services in the schools. For all the kids, not just the sick ones either. We can significantly help societies really mend their wounds this way. But guess what? Social services in the schools are amongst the first to be cut. Teachers get cut too. The people that stay and never get cut? That's right, the administration. These schools are being run in a business model right now. People need to wake the F up and deal with bullcrap like this. It just isn't right. Reminds me of the graphic novel My Friend Dahmer by Durf. It's about a guy who went through school with Jeffrey Dahmer before he became famous for the murders. You should check it out. Everyone should. Not a teacher, but during my secondary school years, there was this one kid in my tutor group. Slight bit of a butthole, but nothing too dramatic. They were also a bit of a class clown at times. I got on with him okay. There was really nothing out of the ordinary. Turns out he ended up shanking and killing his ex while she was at work. I hear he was a substance user as well before it happened. I was utterly shocked by it. My mum taught in a troubled area. Some of what she's told me is scary. Lots of substances in this area resulting in very disturbed kids. No murderers that I know of, but probably some future ones. She taught kids 7 through 10 years. One of them kept scissor blades in his desk. The mother of the kid mentioned was a crystal addict. Others would punch, bite, and lash out in violent rages. Very disturbed for being so young. I hate to admit it, but I will check arrest records annually for one of my former students. He hasn't committed a crime that I know of, but I'm fairly certain that he will. When he was in middle school, he was caught with some pretty extreme adult magazines, and when the school called his mum, she said, "Oh, I know, I gave it to him. How else is he supposed to learn about doing the deed?" When he was in my class, he'd pull down his pants, sit at his desk bare butt, and make lewd motions directed at the girls in the class. So I'd send him to the office, but they'd send him back when he told them his pants were too big and he needed a belt. His mum won a lawsuit against the district for discrimination at some point in the past, and they were terrified of her. I like to believe in the best in people, but that kid just wasn't right. And his mum was even worse. This was a first for me this summer. A 17-year-old boy in my town was arrested for a string of armed robberies. I taught him when he was 14 or 15 years old. He was a nice kid. I never had disciplinary problems with him, and I recall him being an average student. He did hang out with some D-bags though, and I think they had too much influence on him. I was very surprised when I heard he'd been arrested. I've had other students that I suspected might end up in jail. So far, I haven't seen them on the news yet. In 6th grade, I was in a class with a guy who my friend's sister was trying to get with. He was 3 to 4 years older than all of us, he'd shave daily and have full stubble by the 7th period, and he was a butthole to students and teachers alike. He was also 6'4" and wasn't afraid to swing at teachers. In 7th grade, he got expelled and arrested for really forcibly hitting on a whole bunch of people. I had a student once that all the teachers hated. I taught 7th and 8th grade music in IDOWorkHereLady, and had a lot of trouble getting the students used to discipline in general. Anyway, this kid started excelling in my class. I'd let him take his tests verbally at a discrete time so no one would know he couldn't read very well. He'd get up and demonstrate instruments he'd learned to play while he was at juvie. Then one day he just wasn't there anymore. He and a friend decided to jump the next guy they saw because they were bored. Put the guy in intensive care. They were both to be tried as adults. Did I see any signs? Yeah. Held back from high school twice, no parental involvement, fighting in other classes, former juvie sentences, indifferences about not being able to read. In short, student tried to murder someone because bored. There were a lot of signs, still hurt me a lot emotionally that I couldn't make a difference. And somewhat expectedly, here we have it. Just another one in a long list of incredibly troubled people who needed a psychiatrist's evaluation and a lot of treatment, doing damage to other people in a system that ignored a problem for too long because of a lack of funding or motivation. And that applies whether these kids were actually evil or had untreated issues. I'm sure there were signs there were problems coming down the road. My dad always used to tell us the story of how someone he knew at school whacked an old lady as he was climbing out of her window after robbing the care home, by stamping on her neck or something. Apparently he was a bit off at school, but nothing serious, and it was for substance money. I taught behaviorally and emotionally disturbed kids about 10 years back. Most of my kids were pretty terrible students, but one in particular had a severe case of oppositional defiance disorder. During the year I was teaching him, he got in a fight in the hallway and was expelled, as this wasn't his first. He went on to murder 2 people in a substance deal gone bad several months later. My primary thoughts were, absolutely no surprise there. Thank goodness he'll be off the streets for a few years, and glad it wasn't an innocent civilian. A first grader in our school system routinely was found carrying knives in his backpack. One day he painted a picture of a family dying in a fire. His teacher asked about it and he said, "Bad things happen to good people." And then he stared at her and with a slight smile said, "You're a good person." Yeah, we're keeping tabs on him. One of my freshman kids last year was arrested for the unspeakable act about halfway through the year. He was kind of a jerk of a kid, but it was clear he was using it to cover up other things. I had a feeling he'd get arrested for something, but never thought it would be so soon and for such a violent crime. I have to admit, though, I was glad he was out of my class. I had a friend in school who my parents were terrified of. I was 9 or 10, and I couldn't stay away from him for some reason, even though our relationship consisted of him being extremely nice to me for short periods of time and then orchestrating an often bloody fistfight. I remember him straddling me and beating the living crap out of me in the playground after school one day. I was bloody and screaming for help, and parents were all around us, just walking by like it wasn't happening. That's people for you. He was in and out of institutions for years and would just randomly come back to my school before disappearing again. Whenever we saw each other again, he'd talk of his fantasy in which he killed both sets of our parents, and then we'd go and live in a shack in the forest somewhere. The last time I saw him as a kid was when he tried to burn my house down. He orchestrated it so we'd be leaving the house after he'd lit the match. Luckily, my dad was around after we'd left and smelt it before it really got going. He was sent to a pretty heavy-duty institution sometime after that. Anyway, I randomly bumped into him last year, and we've been great friends ever since. He's a fitness instructor, performs in an amateur MMA tournament, and has the most positive and gracious, and just plain chilled out outlook on life, and a truly beautiful doting family. In short, textbook psychopath grows up to be the nicest guy in the room. There were 2 kids in my school, both odd in their own ways. One killed someone with a screwdriver, apparently his girlfriend's mother was always trying to split them up, and then she did something one day and he snapped. Coincidentally, my girlfriend is ex-police and moved into his old house as he was no longer needing it, what with going to prison and all. The other guy committed the unspeakable act on and knifed his own mother, buying himself a one-way ticket to the big house. Not a teacher, but I went to a middle high school with Casey Anthony. She played on my soccer team and dated my ex-boyfriend. She even accused him of being Kaylee's father when he couldn't defend himself. He died in a car accident a few years before all the mess. I never thought she was crazy, but I always thought it was weird she never posted pictures on MySpace or Facebook of her kid until Kaylee was almost 2 years old. No one ever really knew that she had a kid. She partied a lot, and you could tell. She liked the pills, that one. I work at a junior college and had a student that was arrested for murder. She fought a family member that was 6 months pregnant, and, well, things went real bad. She was aggressive in the classroom and had gone off on me and another instructor. She also displayed some bipolar behavior, so I really wasn't that surprised when I saw her on the news. I used to be in a position of training new techs where I work. We had a guy that just always struck me as dirty and creepy. He didn't really do anything creepy per se, I just got a vibe. Sure enough, one day he didn't come in because he was in jail for the unspeakable act. I teach at a post-secondary trade school where we've admitted some people that have gone on to do some horrible things. Arguably, the worst offender was a man who I had little contact with throughout his time at the school because he never showed up to class. He was a first-time father to a child who was less than 2 years old, if I recall, and both he and his girlfriend, the mother, were trying to go to school and take care of the baby at the same time. It didn't work out, and eventually he was terminated from the program. It broke my heart to read the news less than half a year later that he was involved in some truly horrendous crimes. Is this guy the only one that's been through my school and committed a violent crime later? No, and maybe I'll share more later, but this guy really struck a chord with me, and I need a break or I'll just be angry and upset for the rest of my night. What's the most hilarious thing someone has said coming off of anesthesia? Female patient after a C-section asking me how many chickens she had because she had beef with pig. Her husband translated, how much the baby weighed because I have a bet with hubby. Kinda sweet that the husband understood her nonsense so effortlessly. A 15-year-old was waking up and talking more and trying to get out of bed before he was ready. Bud, where are you going? I've got to go to my locker. Buddy, you're in hospital. You can't go to your locker right now. So where are you trying to go? He gave me a very serious expression. The future. My wife is a dentist. One of her patients started moaning loudly. Not the typical moans and groans, I mean like the really good bedroom fun times moaning. It was loud enough that half the clinic heard, including the waiting area. A man asked me if his body parts still belonged to him, and I still think about it. I work in the operating room. Funniest was a guy quickly sitting straight up after extubation. We're all standing around him making sure he doesn't try to jump off the table, and he looks at me and then slowly gives me double finger pistols. Turns his head to another staff member and slowly gives them finger pistols. Didn't say a word, just finger pistols. Pew pew pew. A lot of people wake up really crazy. They just start swinging or getting really restless on a narrow operating room bed. It's really nice when they wake up sleepy and I'll just bundle them up with blankies and roll them out. Emergency room technician here. We often do conscious sedations with ketamine to realign broken bones. I had a 10-year-old girl who snapped her arm on the trampoline. When she was coming out of the ketamine slumber, she asked why she saw God. It was a little freaky. She also scarfed down 4 PB&J sandwiches afterwards, and I was impressed. The best has to be the sledding accident kid who snapped his tibia. When he was coming out of the ketamine sleep, he kept begging us not to tell his mum he smoked green herb for the first time the day before. His mum was in the room while this was taking place. We had to slide board a patient from the stretcher to his bed after an endoscopy. You put a board between them and the stretcher, and then grab the patient and slide them over to the bed with a sheet underneath them. The patient screamed, "Whee!" and then proceeded to tell us that these are the best substances ever and that it felt like the 60s again. Oh boy, bet that guy was gunning for being put under every time he went to a hospital in the future. Also, a reminder that I have to say the word substances instead of the more common term beginning with D when I mean mind-altering chemicals, because that could demonetize the video. Silly YouTube. When I got my wisdom teeth out, the nurse was trying to wake me up and said, "Okay, it's time to open your eyes. Can you open your eyes for me?" And I said, "Say please." She said please very nicely, and I opened my mouth as wide as I could. Guy wakes up in the recovery room after left knee replacement surgery and starts talking with his wife. "Well, at least I still have 2 good knees." "Oh, honey," she replied, "you just had knee surge," and he interrupts in a loud voice, "My right knee and my weenie." Woke up thinking I'd done the deed with my doctor, and I apologized to him for how bad it was. Well, I fell back asleep again, so thankfully I didn't have to endure a reaction. When I was in high school, I was just getting put under and feeling loopy for a wisdom teeth operation, and the nurse was making small talk with me and told me she graduated from the same high school I went to and was on the dance team, and I told her, "No, you weren't. You have to be pretty to be on the dance team," right before blacking out. I think about this sometimes before I go to sleep at night. Nurse, I am so sorry to do you like that when you were just doing your job. A friend of mine woke up after surgery and stated, "I want to eat a Christmas tree." I had a male patient who, as he woke up, mumbled, "I'm not pregnant?" Are you sure he didn't say, "I'm pregnant? Pregante? Pregnant? Pregnant?" Not a nurse, but I had dental surgery at a hospital in Bangkok a few years ago. I had pretty much come out of anesthesia and was just waiting for the doctor and discharge stuff. There was this giant Aussie guy also in recovery, and he kept trying to sneak away. Like he'd look around, grab his IV pole, and tiptoe towards the exit. The nurses were just kind of herding him around the room back to his bed, and then he'd do the same thing again. The nurse with me asked if I wanted the curtains closed, and I was like, hell no. I just had major oral surgery and this was funny. So she and I sat there for nearly 20 minutes watching his shenanigans. Nurses have the patience of saints, I swear. My brother got his wisdom teeth out not too long ago. When he woke up, he started laughing a lot. Like he wasn't laughing super hard, but he was laughing for a long time and it almost sounded monotone. After a couple of minutes of just flatline laughter, he stopped and mumbled, "Chicken," like it's what he was laughing at. Don't know why, but it stopped him from laughing for a while after that. Did a short stint in recovery as part of my graduate program. I got proposed to a couple of times. Same guy would walk past me in the corridor a day later and just not recognize me. How rude. Proposes and then just ignores you just because he didn't like your reply? I was briefly put under for an endoscopy. When I came to, I cried, and my nurse was so sweet to me. I kept asking if I'd died and then thanked her for not letting me die, and she was so sweet and legit held me for a minute. I once told the nurses to stop, I wasn't asleep yet. I wasn't ready. They laughed and said they were done. Another time I came out saying sometimes you feel like a nut and sometimes you don't. Almond Joy has nuts and mounds don't. No clue why I was singing this, but the nurses thought I was hilarious and let the family know that it had happened. I had that for a wisdom tooth removal. Woke up, asked why they were putting me out, and they said I was done. I then sat up and felt like the fun part of a week-long bender. It wasn't something he said, but I had a patient in his 50s attempt to motorboat his wife when she came to pick him up. She was mortified, and I managed to keep a straight face while giving her all of his post-op instructions. Not anesthesia, but post-op in ICU. Patient had brain surgery for a neuroma. He had a brain drain, but otherwise was fine. I said, "Hi sir, I have your dinner. Do you need help?" "Nah, I can do it. What is it?" It's white fish." "Ugh." I said, "It's brain food." "If that's the case, I need a whale." I laughed for 2 hours afterwards. When my brother got home after his wisdom teeth, he was on the couch in the TV room laughing, and when we asked what he was laughing about, he said, "This is just the funniest show ever." The TV wasn't even on. I had ankle surgery last year. They gave me animal crackers after, and I remember being really upset that I didn't realize until the last cracker that I forgot to look at the animals and appreciate each one. So I am a nurse. My favorite while I was working was a man who woke up from a double big toe amputation and was super worked up about how he was going to wear flip-flops, until I suggested he try out slides instead. But my favorite coming out of anesthesia story was actually my husband's. I went back to see him in recovery, and he was super eager to leave and was trying to remember where he parked, and I said, "Oh, don't worry, babe, I'll bring the car around." "You know where the car is?" "I do. I drove us here, actually." "You drove us here? Oh my god, you drove us here? Thank you." "You're welcome, I was happy to do it." "Oh my god, you drove us here. Wow." He was close to tears at this point. I took him to lunch afterwards, and he nodded off while staring intently at a novelty salt shaker. Oh yeah, I've seen that some people on the old laughing gas are actually just really sweet and appreciative of their partners while it's wearing off. Honestly, super cute. I wonder if there are any stories of them going the opposite way. I mean, I hope not, but curious to see. Backstory: my grandmother desperately needed a hip replacement. She didn't want the surgery, but it had reached the point where my grandfather couldn't care for her unless she got it, and had to give her the ultimatum to either have the surgery or move into assisted living, something she absolutely did not want. She had some onset of dementia, so everyone was extremely worried what the anesthesia would do to her mental condition. After surgery, they were asking her questions to see if the anesthesia had affected her cognitive functions. My grandfather asked, "Do you know who I am?" And her response was, "You're the dirty, rotten little so-and-so who did this to me," as she pointed at her leg. Oh, and she also named both her stuffed cat and her cane George. Anybody else who she didn't immediately recognize by name while the anesthesia wore off was also dubbed George. There was nobody in our family named George. This one's kinda long. I worked in an ER and we had a patient, a guy between 18 to 20 years old, who had spontaneous pneumothorax or a collapsed lung. Not quite as bad as it sounds. He basically had a small area of air between his lung and chest wall. We had to put in a small chest tube to remove the air. We did a moderate sedation, basically kinda knock him out but not put him completely under. One of the meds used was Versed, which has an amnesic effect, so they don't remember anything. The procedure was done and I was monitoring him when he starts coming back around. He looks at me and asks, "So, when are we going to do this thing?" And I said, "We're already done, look at your chest." We had a drain and dressing in place, and he looks down, then looks at me and says, "Dude, how did you do that?" This happened 20 plus years ago and it still makes me laugh. When I got my wisdom teeth removed, I apparently had a very religious experience. I'm an agnostic. I told my mum, who was with me, that I saw people walking on water. Next, I kept telling her that I saw Jesus. Apparently, when the female nurse came back into the room, I did the Catholic sign of the cross and whispered to my mum, "That's him, that's Jesus." The nurse lost her cool somewhat. My family and friends still talk about it several years later. My twin sister started speaking fluent Spanish to my mum after she woke up from getting her wisdom teeth removed. We're half Puerto Rican on our mum's side, so we've grown up hearing Spanish, but neither of us had ever carried a fluent conversation with her in it. But apparently my doped-up sister could. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. "Did you fancy up my Johnson a little bit?" was said to me, the post-op resident nurse, after the patient's vasectomy. Patient here, I went on a long rant about how Bugs Bunny appeared in my dreams and told me lies. No idea how my brain came up with that one. I was coming out of it at the dentist's office when I sat bolt upright and shouted, "You have to save them!" The dentist asked, "Save who?" "The owls." "What owls?" "The owls trapped inside the gas machine. They were hooting. I could hear them. You have to save them." I was coming off anesthesia, and the nurses in the recovery room were all poking fun at each other about which Hogwarts house they'd be in. And I said, "According to my ex-wife, I'm a house elf." I'm not a nurse, but I was in charge of my sister after she got her wisdom teeth out. I got her in the car and she was bawling, wouldn't stop crying and trying to put her fingers in her mouth. Mind you, she was 20 at the time. I got her back to my apartment and she was having a hard time staying upright, so I'm helping support her as we walk up to the door. She's still crying but is now trying to do a heel click. We almost fall over. My neighbor sees us and runs over to help open my door. We get her inside. She then proceeds to spend another hour crying about how she wants to write a Harry Potter Pride and Prejudice crossover ballet in which she would play Dumbledore, Lizzie Bennet, and Mr. Darcy all herself. I then asked her who I would play. She thought long and hard and said Hedwig and Mr. Collins. That's when it stopped being entertaining. I'm a 26-year-old male nurse and I take care of kids. After surgery, this little girl said in a slurred little voice, "Whoa, a real leprechaun? I have red hair." I had my appendix out, and according to my wife, the doctor came around with a bunch of student doctors and pulled my gown to the side to show the keyhole scars. Now, the bottom one is below the pants line, and I wasn't wearing underwear and apparently said, "Don't act like you're not impressed," and then closed my eyes. They all had a good laugh, my wife was mortified, and I was sound asleep. I still hear about it from her almost 10 years later. Not sure if it counts, but during a C-section I was medicated up to the high heavens and I shouted, "It hurts!" I couldn't actually feel anything. The surgeon panicked and said, "What does it feel like?" I said, triangles." At the dentist, I woke up like a shot from anesthesia, got up and ran through the office, with the dental assistants chasing behind me. I ran to the washroom, still completely medicated up, looked into the mirror, and while pouring at my numb face said, "I need to make sure I don't look like Joan Rivers." A friend of mine said that one of her patients was convinced he was a burrito and needed her to sprinkle cilantro on him. When I got all 4 of my wisdom teeth out at once, I woke up and immediately asked, "Can I eat KFC now?" And they all got a laugh out of that. That was the only thing I cared about. Probably not as entertaining as I'd hoped, but I got a laugh out of them anyhow, so yay! And yes, I did get KFC after. Just a large mashed potato and mac and cheese. Took me 3 days to finish it all, though. Was told it was fine as long as I was careful about my stitches. Answering as someone coming off of anesthesia while in the middle of surgery, I said, "I tried a dog biscuit too," in response to my surgeon telling his colleague how he had to eat a dog biscuit while pledging. Another time I squeaked like a dolphin while in the middle of surgery. Kinda weird that I do remember doing it, and my surgeon was freaked out that I knew I did it. The fact that this happened at all kind of suggests that it's probably not the first or last time in all the many cases of anesthesia, but I can't imagine it would ever not be absolutely horrifying to have the person you're operating on come alive and start making noises, no matter how silly. My God. Anesthesia hits my family pretty hard. Low vitals, takes longer to wake up. It can be pretty scary for my mum, who's usually the caretaker. Last winter, I had an endoscopy and just wasn't waking up. It took me a while to gain awareness after I did arise, and the first thing I remember is asking my mum for pancakes. She responded with a worried, "I know, we'll get pancakes later once you're up to it." I was convinced that she had been reading my mind and was very concerned about her new psychic abilities until they told me I'd been awake for about 30 minutes and had asked for pancakes at least 10 times before I regained awareness. My grandmother gets very angry when she comes off of anesthesia and swears everyone was mistreating her during her surgery. The night after her hip surgery, and lots of angry accusations and having to be tied to the bed for a good portion of the day, I spent the night with her at the hospital. She had a confusing and restless night and was in a lot of pain, but very out of it. The next day, the doctor came in to talk to her about being moved to the rehab center. She started ranting about how it better not be the same place she slept last night because they made her sleep on the concrete floor of a barn. Everyone tried reasoning with her, but she'd just point at me and say, "Ask that girl, she was there." After a few minutes of increasingly agitated ranting, I said, "It's a different place, Nanny," and that settled that. I underwent a procedure and had to be put under anesthesia. According to my dad, who was in the room, the doctor asked me how I was feeling and I said to him, "I feel like crap. Can I go back to hell?" It was funny at the time. I woke up from surgery angry because the anesthesiologist told me he was just giving me oxygen, but then the next thing I knew, I woke up in post-op. I told the nurse, "That witch lied to me," and she just said, "Okay," and went to get my parents. I had a strong dislike of needles and IVs as a teen, so they offered me laughing gas to make it so I didn't care about the needle. I remember them opening my mouth and preparing for surgery, and I was teed off as hell the whole time because the laughing gas just made my eyes itchy, and I cared very much about the needle still, and here they were about to cut my jaw open when I was still awake. Then there was sunshine and a cactus, And then I was in the passenger seat of my mum's car. Apparently they wheeled me out and I briefly came to outside the office, next to that cactus, but I was too medded up and full of gauze to really say anything about it at all. After I got my wisdom teeth out, I was convinced I was Clark Kent and kept taking my glasses off and mumbling, "I'm Superman." And then I cried when they told me they were going to put my teeth in the incinerator because for some reason, medded out me thought they meant all my teeth. I had a nurse say a weird thing to me as I was coming off of anesthesia. I had a baby that died. I had 4 children, but only 3 of them lived. I'd been rushed into the hospital with extreme pain and tons of internal bleeding, and then they found out I had an ectopic pregnancy that had ruptured my fallopian tube, which was a strange surprise because I'd had barely any encounter resembling the kinds that get you pregnant. But I guess one crazy swimmer managed to get up my tubes despite the rarity of my reproductive behavior. I hadn't even missed my time of the month or anything. They zoomed me into surgery and gave me lots of meds. It was a huge relief to have the emergency resolved, and I didn't really think of myself as pregnant with a baby. I mostly just thought, I'm dying, holy crap, they actually know what the F is wrong with me and they're going to fix it with medicine and stuff. Hallelujah, I'm not going to die. Post-surgery, I woke up quite disoriented and alone with a very kind older nurse who promptly told me she had once lost her baby. I was very confused for a long while. I really hadn't even processed that I'd even been pregnant or lost a baby, so I didn't realize she was trying to comfort me by sharing a shared loss. I just thought that this nurse decided to randomly tell me her baby had died as I woke up alone in a room with her, and I was like, oh, that's terrible. You poor stranger, lady, I'm so sorry that happened to you. But why are you telling me this? In retrospect, she was very nice. She'd try to be very kind to someone going through a lot. Thank you, nurse lady. My brother got his wisdom teeth out, and when he woke up, he gestured frantically for a pen and paper. The nurse gave it to him, and he wrote, "Thanks for the pen." I was a student nurse for 2 semesters. On a placement in a post-op ward, an old guy had a reaction to the anesthetic and thought he was back in the Korean War. He kept trying to get out of bed to help his mates. The 2 nurses couldn't figure out how to stop him, and they called security. Meanwhile, I walked up and in my most officious-sounding voice said to the nurse I was partnered with, "Stand down, Lieutenant, I'll take over from here." She looked confused but moved aside and I said to him, "Soldier, you took some shrapnel, you need to rest and recover. Now stand down or I'll have you court-martialed for insubordination. Understood?" He looked at me for a second, looked around, replied nice and loud, "Yes, ma'am," and went back to bed. "Drink this juice," and young me said, "Okay, fine." I drank it and fell asleep in under a minute. And after surgery I said, "Mum, why are you laughing?" "Well, you told the nurse that she was a naughty girl and that you had called Dad to punch her." Okay, so not all of the medicated people are the sweet kind, but at least they seem harmless so far, even when they're being defiant and getting out and about against the nurse's wishes. Although I'm sure in the extensive history of using this stuff, somebody has definitely got punchy with it. After my spinal surgery, I was talking about how excited I was that Voldemort wanted to marry me. Okay, Bellatrix. I'm a nurse. All of the level 1 general anesthesia patients were snoozing and in no pain. I was walking by and sneezed. I was almost to the door and I heard a subdued voice say, "Bless you." Never did figure out which patient said it, but it was so sweet. Another time it was a coworker who had had surgery, and when I went to check on them, they wailed, "I just want everyone to like me." It was funny as heck because it was a doctor who used to yell a lot. After her hip surgery, my grandma thought she was fighting in the War of 1812. My wife, who I had been married to for over a year, came out of oral surgery last week and decided that she was going to go tell her mum that she was gay. Her mum replied, "Kaylin, I was at the wedding." It gave me a huge laugh. I don't remember this, but apparently when I woke up from getting my wisdom teeth removed, I wanted to get the teeth back. I was pretty adamant about it, but the dentist compromised by letting me take a picture of them on my phone. I was looking at my phone and saw the picture and I was like, "What's this?" And he explained what had happened. What's the rudest or most wrong thing a mental health professional said to you? I had a psychiatrist who was convinced I was anorexic even though I wasn't. It really sucked because my therapist and my psychiatrist worked at the same company and they had a policy where they don't help people with eating disorders. So even though I went to a specialist and they confirmed I didn't have an eating disorder, I was still banned from that facility and lost my long-term therapist. Nothing. She fell asleep in her chair while writing notes. I was talking about the death of my parents. I was 16 and never went to another therapist. My therapist, whom I've just discontinued, would literally order a meal and eat it right in front of me while literally saying nothing. She did that for the entire year I wasted with her. I was just watching this lady eat her food while saying nothing, only then to give me snarky two-word replies. At that time, I moved from Berdsk, a small city in the region, to Novosibirsk. In the new school, preventative conversations were held with a psychologist. All of the children told about their dreams, hobbies, and shared their views on life. I said that I love rock and I'd like to spend my youth traveling or working. Apparently, the psychologist wasn't impressed. In front of the whole class, she said, "Are you from Berdsk? That explains why you're so weird. Everything in your city is not of this world." Interpretation of an offensive phrase in Russian hinting that you're crazy. When they say things like, "Okay, I understand how you're feeling, thank you for telling me that," and then proceed to ignore most of the things you've said. At 14, telling my shrink about how I was bullied in school. "Did they make fun of your nose?" "No." And that's how I found out I have a big nose. Also a terrible counselor. You should always ask open-ended questions like, "What did they make fun of you for?" instead of, "Did they make fun of this explicit thing?" "Oh, did they call you chubby dum-dum or little fat ears?" Oh, this is what happens when a school bully takes a fast track to psychiatry. Great little comedic comments adding up into our very serious subject matter here today. But really, I'm truly shocked at how insensitive some of these so-called professionals can be. I was dealing with a lot of family issues at the time, and my ex had just broken up with me that week, so I was taking it fairly hard. My therapist said, "It's because they found someone better." And when I said no and tried to explain, this therapist just dug in deeper that my ex had dumped me because they found someone better than me. This didn't happen to me but to my late father, and I'm still angry. My brother, his only son, had a nervous breakdown after our mother died. He was good through and through. It was like losing two people at once. My father believed, sadly, that my brother would find his way home, but he never lived to see him again. We know he's alive out there. Now, I worked in a funeral home that assisted the coroner's office. If someone passes away, they can take the fingerprints to identify them. Bottom line is, there are many ways that they can identify a deceased person. My father was a trucker, blue-collar kind of guy. When he lost his leg, he lost his ability to work, and he hated it. I'm convinced he would have preferred to die in his truck. He was a provider, but he was a good father and loved his children. The therapist asked why he was depressed, and he said he misses his son. She said, "You know, there's a good chance he's been dead for a while, yet you've continued to live." He was quiet when we got into the car, and I knew something was wrong. Finally, he told me what she'd said. I called the therapist and asked where the frick she got off putting that idea in his head. The man had lost enough. He refused further counseling, and who could blame him? I went to see a counselor who was supposed to help me deal with being repeatedly mistreated when I was younger. The witch kept asking me, "But didn't it feel good? It felt good, right? Just admit it felt good," until I was a sobbing mess. I'm female, and the therapist was also female, which made it all the more difficult to deal with coming from a woman. Mine told me that my dad was in hell after he had committed self-deletion. I was 12. I ran out of there faster than anything. 3 times being sent home and psych ward visit later. "I'll just go back to work, you'll be fine. You don't need different meds." Couple years ago, my partner was trying to find a therapist. In the first few appointments, this woman told her that if she didn't start doing certain things, I'd burn out and leave her. I'd never spoken to this woman in my life, and she knew nothing about me. My girlfriend never went back, after she struggled for a few weeks thinking it might be true before telling me what she said. "Well, you've certainly got a lot going on there," followed by an awkward silence and nothing helpful. It was the first time ever opening up on that level for me. Real bad experience. In high school, I was pretty difficult because of some real intense crap happening in my life. I wasn't on anything or violent or flunking out. However, I had a super rough family home life, as well as some pretty troubling encounters with the opposite gender, and I withdrew because of it. My parents were very Sunday Christian, meaning while at church they're the best Christians ever, but the teachings did not make it home. They still don't understand why only one of their 6 kids talks to them, that kind of thing. Anyway, they gave us no privacy whatsoever. They were always in our phones, our bags, and our rooms, or just in every aspect of our life it offered them control, and I knew it would be no different when they found me a counselor and you know her. Their words. Guys, they sent me to therapy with the pastor's wife. It became super clear she was telling them things immediately, but I held out hope until I couldn't anymore, because I didn't really have proof. I ended up telling her that I got an offender bender, but there was no damage, so it was all good. Well, she told my parents right when I left, I guess, because when I showed up at home, my dad demanded to see my bumpers. They won't admit what happened to this day, but they never made me go again, so there's that at least. Also, I guess this turned out mostly about my parents, but screw them and that so-called counselor too. In short, cheap parents hired a therapist that they knew would give them info. I got suspicious and confirmation after I told a ridiculous lie, and my parents sat me down to talk about it when I'd never told them anything. Since it was a lie, it took years to trust any adult after that, which I still struggle with as a 34-year-old. I was told that there was no point in continuing therapy because I was emotionally devoid and was wasting her time. It was a licensed therapist that I was referred to by my doctor after an emotional breakdown. Ironic much? Her comment came on our third appointment. We'd never clicked, and she had made judgmental comments about my parenting choices in the first session, so there wasn't any trust there. I've since found a new therapist who's amazing, and now, 5 years on, I've left a toxic marriage, dropped 2 of the 3 meds I was taking, and am generally thriving. While her comment initially stalled me and left me feeling that there was no hope, I'm now genuinely happy and loving my life. I'm also halfway through my studies to become a counselor myself. I use my creativity with art and crafts as a coping skill and as something that gives me extra purpose in life. A psychologist told me that doing so is maladaptive. I didn't go back. You'll never do an important job like doctor, veterinarian, firefighter, or lawyer or counselor. You'll probably end up in Walmart your whole life. I was 8 years old and still remember how mad my parents were. I'm currently working at an international factory, keeping my money to open my own shelter for stray animals and training them. Got 2 certifications, 1 for training and 1 for cooking. Maybe I'll end up cooking new recipes for the stray animals at my shelter, huh? I know a guy who became a dentist out of spite after a conversation like this with a career guidance guy in high school. I was having panic attacks daily, and the meds he gave me made my anxiety worse. Turns out I was just having bad reactions to SSRIs, and that was all he kept trying like a moron. Anyway, I was in his office and he seems to be taking it personally that all the SSRIs he's put me on are giving me seriously bad side effects. Have you just given up then? The moron asks. Do you just want to be like this the rest of your life? Obviously fricking not, that's why I'm in this office trying new medications. I was so angry and yet also having a panic attack at the same time. I ended up just walking out and finding a new psychiatrist later. The day you think you know everything is the day you'll kill someone. It's a pretty popular saying in my side of healthcare. There's definitely some wisdom to that. Being arrogant enough to assume that your first general guess is absolutely right with no room to correct for any new info that comes out isn't a great trait to have at the best of times, but in any medical field? My god, yeah, you could kill someone. And here's our next story about a deluded quack simultaneously trying to make a quick buck off her patients. You need to find religion and also buy the self-help book series that I wrote. For this, it's important to know that I live in Germany. I saw a psychologist once who treats and diagnoses adults with Asperger's. I was there for my second diagnostic interview, and my mother was with me to be interviewed as well. She told the doctor about my sensory issues, especially with noise, because I'd occasionally scream and punch walls and throw stuff around if I was too overloaded with a sound. The psychologist just said something along the lines of, well, 100 years ago people like this would have been treated rather differently around here, huh? And laughed in our faces. Even if he wasn't talking about National Socialist euthanasia, which took place not quite 100 years ago, I still felt incredibly disgusted and angry. The entire interview with him was a disaster, but this was clearly the worst thing he did. Okay, this is actually my mum's story, but it is relevant. 1980s in the UK. My mum is pregnant with me and my dad is, well, he's not a good person. My dad called my mum when she was out, asking her to come home. Mum thought he sounded odd, so asked a friend to come with her. Daddy Dearest is indeed completely blotto, which has brought out all of his angry tendencies, and he fires a 9mm that God knows where he got it at my mum. Missed, thankfully. The police are called, a standoff occurs, and it's hours before he's finally taken down. The psychiatrist who treats him afterwards tells my mum, who's bracing herself for a good old-fashioned divorce, not to leave him as he wouldn't cope. F that noise. Unfortunately, they did succeed in guilting Mum into staying, but she got out a few years later and gave me the best childhood. She passed a few years ago now, but damn, she was awesome. Holy frick, I just remembered my ex-husband's psychiatrist called me and implored me to make it work. And a few months later, he tried to off me in a substance-induced rage. Screw all of that. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had a therapist tell me that my soul, long before I was born, chose my parents and subsequent horrible upbringing so that I could learn from it. By this logic, of course, the victim is always in control and the person ruining their life is helpless. Argue with that logic. Needless to say, I never saw her again. And some clarification, the therapist subscribed to the just world theory, which is often, but not always, taught in Western psychology. The problem, of course, other than the victim blaming, is the blatant narcissism required to believe someone else exists only to fulfill your soul's destiny by harming you. The people who do this to their kids are 100% responsible for their own behavior, not their targets. I remember giggling to myself after I got home, thinking I should have just kicked her really hard in the face and gone, well, guess your soul must have chosen that for you, huh? I took a psych test, and when we were going over the results, the psychologist implied that all of my mental health issues were due to being too sensitive and were therefore my fault. I remember feeling broken for like a week afterwards, just crying when I was alone. The same guy wrote in my psych report that I was lying on my test, when I'd previously told him I self-report very poorly. If I met this guy in a dark alleyway tomorrow, I'd probably break his self-important nose. I went to see a psychiatrist because I was having symptoms of PTSD after an ex tried to unalive me when I left him, then stalked me, forced his way into my apartment, and committed the unspeakable act on me. The psychiatrist, an older man, told me that I needed to work on my physical appearance and demeanor to be more feminine and demure. Because quality men weren't attracted to women who looked and behaved like me, and if I ever tried to get involved in any other relationship without making myself more appealing to quality men first, I'd end up right back in the same situation. Mine just said, maybe you shouldn't be here. I had better luck with medication. I was fresh out of high school and really not doing very well. No friends, horrible relationship with my mum and stepdad, and nobody to confide in. I gave in after being pressured to see someone because mental health issues run in my family. I booked an hour-long assessment. I was in and out in 20 minutes. The guy completely dismissed me because I was young, and every young person goes through these things. Everyone worries about their future. This is totally normal. It took me 3 years to go back and was admitted after my second appointment. Do you ever have thoughts about not being alive anymore? Yes. Do you have a plan for not being alive anymore? Yes. Do you feel you're a danger to yourself or you'll hurt yourself before your next appointment? Yes. Great. I'll double your Prozac. See you next week. I was a nurse. I know if a patient says those sort of things, it's an instant 24-hour keep in the hospital or admission for monitoring. And I wasn't joking. I meant it 100%. I never went back to that guy. Events happened that kept me from following through instantly with my plan, but I'll never forget that jerk. I left the office thinking, well, even a guy that's paid to care whether I live or die doesn't care. That seals the deal. I had to go to the hospital because I'd sliced myself about 4 years ago. I sat in the room where there are multiple different people and cases going on, so there weren't any walls between the patients. And what does the head nurse do? Oh, we've got a cutter, to the whole damn room. You could see how uncomfortable the other nurses were, and even some policemen looking after someone else looked upset that she had decided to yell it to everyone. Made me feel like complete garbage on top of how I already felt at the time. Well, you make good eye contact and you're an engaging, interesting conversationalist. Clearly you can't have ADHD. My other patients are crystal addicts with no direction in life. You think your problems are as bad as theirs? This guy was apparently an ADHD specialist. I'd been seeing him to try and make sense of my crippling executive dysfunction and lifelong problems with attentiveness. He just spent our sessions telling me my problems weren't bad enough because apparently everyone with an attention disorder is a frickin' delinquent. Also, way to throw your other patients, who are surely coming to you to deal with their own demons, under the bus, my dude. I was explaining to a therapist that I used to run a cancer charity, and part of my depression came from talking to so many people who had lost someone or were in the process of losing someone and being an emotional sponge for them. The therapist then proceeded to tell me about their loved one who had died of cancer. My God, how did some of these people get their licenses? Also, there are idiots like me who have a better idea of conversational cues and safe areas than this bloody guy. Then again, it matches with all of my friends who've told me that they had to really shop around to find their first therapist. When I was 11, I started feeling a lot of anxiety and fear about going to school, church, or basically any place with a lot of people. My brother had been getting therapy for a while, so my parents set me up with a counselor at the same facility. The only session I went to started normally enough. We talked a bit to help get me comfortable. I described what I was experiencing, normal first season stuff. The counselor then asked me to close my eyes and imagine a situation where I felt anxious, and then when I did so, he instructed me to find Jesus there and go to him. Now, I grew up in a religious family, and here, nearly 20 years later, I still believe, but that was not what I was expecting out of an alleged medical professional. Long story short, we did that and nothing else repeatedly for the rest of the hour-long session, aka eternity for an anxious, uncomfortable child. I left with the impression that therapy was bullcrap and I didn't seek out any mental health care until I was in my 20s. Turns out I've got depression and anxiety issues and they respond pretty well to medication. If I'd had help from a young age, I might have been able to develop coping skills. Instead, I flunked out of college twice and developed an addiction to alcohol. Oh well, live and learn, I guess. In short, counselor tells young me to find Jesus, so I decide to just live with mental illnesses most of my life. I can't remember the exact wording, but essentially they told me that being an unspeakable act victim, both by a friend and an ex, was invalid because I was a man. And that really messed me up for a while. Made me afraid of getting psychiatric or therapeutic help again for a while until things got really bad. I went back, saw a better therapist at a different clinic, and she actually talked to me about how horrible that person was. It was really helpful. That's called solitary confinement. I'm calling the police right now, said by my family's counselor when she discovered my elementary school was locking up myself and several other students in tiny closets every day. When I was younger, my sister and mum weren't getting along, and my mum decided we'd see a family counselor. Most of my time with the counselor was easygoing, happy, and short, as I had nothing to do with my sister and mother arguing and screaming at each other all the time. That was until she asked me how school was doing and started digging into what my daily life was like. In 5th grade, I was caught trying to out one of my female teachers for putting down students and cursing at us too. She used to get a rise out of berating one particularly sweet and timid girl in the class. Well, the teacher caught me recording her cursing and sent me to detention for the rest of the year. Detention was 3 small rooms behind the principal's office, with room for just one student in each closet-sized cell. They would lock us in, and the only times we were allowed out was for lunch or to join other classes for wall sits in the middle of Arizona summers. We had to knock and ask to use the restroom, which was located in the principal's office area as well, so no chance to see other students. Usually, one of the small rooms, as we called them, was occupied by a mentally handicapped student who would scream and bang his head on the wall. Poor kid who had no clue why they were locking him up in a tiny room. Oh, and if any of us were really bad, they'd turn the lights off on us until whoever was acting up would shut up. This usually made the screaming guy go berserk until he hyperventilated or passed out. Countless days spent plugging my ears and choking back tears. I eventually gouged a small hole under the desk, which was permanently attached to the walls. I disassembled pens and would wrap a note around the ink cartridge, and then pass the note and pen through the wall to whoever was on the other side. This lasted for a large part of that grade, but they eventually found the pen hole and punished all of us with more wall sits in the sun while watching everyone else play at recess. I don't know who these people were running the elementary school, but this stuff changed my perception of the world pretty quickly. I thought I could trust anyone with authority, but after this, I pretty much laugh at anyone that thinks they have some sort of power or authority or seniority over another human being. The counselor called the cops, and we went straight to the school so I could show everyone where the rooms were. I was too terrified to go inside with all of the staff still inside the school. The officer and my counselor assured me that nothing bad would happen to me, but I did refuse to go. They told me the rooms were shut down, but I went a couple of years later and confirmed that they'd just closed them temporarily. A part of me still wants to go and see if they're still using those closets or cells today. Are you a lesbian because of trauma? In most cases, that's what happened. How do your parents deal with your orientation? I was not there about anything even remotely related to my orientation. I'd seen one therapist about various issues affecting me. After a number of sessions and exploration, we got to the cause of my problems being that my mum had died when I was young. I moved and started with a new therapist. I started explaining my background with, "My mum died," to which I got, "You can't blame it all on that. I get that therapists are trained to challenge your lines of thought, but that was annoying as frick." A psychiatrist put me on OxyContins because I told him if there was an antidepressant that made me feel like I do when I have oxys, then I'd feel much better. 10 years ago, things were a lot different, I guess. When I was in my early 20s, I was still a virgin at the time, and it was really upsetting me. A therapist told me it was a good thing, and then showed me pictures of transmitted diseases. She told me that they were God's punishment for immoral behavior, and 1 in 3 people had one. I told her that they were probably irresponsible people that didn't use protection, and she told me that rubber couldn't protect me from God's anger. She then prayed I remained a virgin until marriage, and that I'd no longer desire to commit the sin of premarital whoopee. Looking back, I should have reported her to some sort of therapist licensing board. Also, I've had plenty of fun since about a year after that, and still no diseases. I guess God just isn't angry enough at me. What happens to cops who arrest other cops, VIPs, or just people who think they're above the law? I policed in a smaller town, about 20,000 people tops, for 8 years. I was a military transplant. I didn't know anyone locally when I was hired. Lots of good old boys and friends of friends that could get away with almost anything. So we had a city councilwoman who believed no parking signs on her street didn't pertain to her. One particular shift at about 2 a.m., out of sheer frustration I guess, I found her truck parked in the street and decided to wake her up and politely ask her to move it. Thank God for body cameras. Next morning at 9 a.m., I was awoken by a phone call from my superior that a formal complaint had been filed for vulgar language and intimidation by same councilwoman. Again, thank God for body cameras. My father had to arrest a retired NYPD officer for a DWI in North Carolina. It was interesting to say the least. He was a jerk. He acted like my father was disrespecting the badge by arresting another officer. Did your dad say anything about, I don't know, disrespecting the law? I got hit by a drunk driver early in my career. Spent a long time in the hospital and was pensioned off. Thanks for a lifetime of pain, drunk driver. He was back on the road before I got out of traction. So yeah, I always had a thing against drunk drivers when I was a policeman. Found out pretty quick that cops make up a high percentage of offenders in the late 1970s, and I was pretty quickly ostracized after locking a few of those guys up. The local head of the police department here gave himself a ticket recently. He realized he'd parked in the loading zone. He'd just been telling his team how they had to respect laws around parking and zoning. So props to him. I really respect the guy. He also tries to encourage the state government not to increase police funding and instead spend more on social work, early intervention programs for addicts, stuff like that. He says policing is what happens when all other measures have failed. He strongly supports safe substance use rooms, needle supply and disposal programs, detox programs, stuff like that. He's changed his mind on various proposed rules around things like restricting new or probationary drivers from having high-powered cars after examination of the evidence showed that the proposed rule would be ineffective or was not justified by the statistics. We really need more people like him. Holy crap, a principled man. I reckon we're going to get a lot of very concerning stories about gross misuses of power against the few cops that try to be the exception to the ACAB rule here, so I just thought I'd chuck it in once I saw it. Seems like this guy is the standard a lot of the higher-ups in the command should hold themselves to. A friend's father was the commander of the local state police post. He lived by a railroad track that had been out of use for several decades, yet there was still a stop sign at the crossing by his house. Everybody knew this sign was obsolete and nobody stopped for it. He was pulled over by a local town police officer and issued a ticket for running the stop sign. The officer told my friend's father, "Hey, just because you're a state patrolman doesn't give you the right to run this stop sign." A couple of days later, friend's father was going to lunch in his state cruiser and the town officer speeds by him in his town cruiser. State trooper pulls him over and gives him a speeding ticket. Friend's father tells him, "Just because you're a town cop and driving a police car doesn't give you the right to speed and break the law when you're not responding to a call." Yeah, nothing scandalous or anything. It was something basic that I would typically not ticket for. I think failing to stop when entering a public road from a business or something like that. Anyway, the individual immediately pulled out some state law enforcement ID instead of his license. I had to awkwardly tell him to provide the license, insurance, registration, and he went on about his years of service in whatever state. The rest of the stop went as usual, once I could get him to provide the documentation anyway. I ran his information and served him a citation. It drives me crazy when people try to pull a law enforcement officer card. Just be cool. He must have pled guilty and paid it, though, because I had no further involvement. A police officer came into the Home Depot that I work at and tried to return a weed whacker because it didn't work. He was in uniform still. We explained that because A, he didn't have a receipt, and B, the particular model he was trying to return was pretty old, that we don't even sell it anymore and haven't for a while, and that it couldn't be returned. He basically said that he was a cop and we were committing a crime for selling him a faulty weed whacker. He then proceeded to walk over to the garden center, pick up a brand new weed whacker, and walk out the door with it. This is theft. The police were called and we all watched a police officer get arrested. Crazy stuff. A state trooper pulled the cop card when I worked at the depot. He was buying concrete. I started to load a partial pallet in the back of his half-ton truck, and he wanted me to put the full one in, so he only had to make one trip. Your truck can't handle a full pallet, man. I'm a cop. Yeah, you are. So I loaded the full pallet up and watched his truck squat. Sat right down on the tires as soon as he tried to drive off. I didn't help him unload it. That logic, though. Sir, what about physics? I'm a cop. But what about gravity? I'm a cop. My pastor was the police chaplain in our town. He wrote a sheriff's deputy a ticket for parking his cruiser in a no parking zone. It was either a school zone or a fire hydrant, I think. And the guy wasn't parking for police business, so the cop couldn't argue out of it. There was a crap storm from the deputy about how he's a cop and he can't ticket cops. About 3 weeks later, my youth group has a trip to go to bowling in a city the next county over. Well, the D-bag deputy decides to pull a U-turn through the grass median and pull over my pastor with a bunch of us high schoolers in the back. Pulls our pastor out and walks him back to his cruiser to give him a ticket for speeding. To be honest, I'm not sure if the pastor was or wasn't speeding. Our pastor comes back and said he's got a speeding ticket and wonders what the deputy is doing in the next county over. And we're not talking like a stone's throw from the line. We're talking miles over the line where the cop shouldn't be. My town recently had a big stink about our local cops not being where they should be, so that the sheriff's office was doing that too riled up some folks, I can tell you. My father is a cop. He once pulled over his superior for drunk driving. His boss expected special treatment. My dad arrested him. He then ended up leaving the department because he was warned, "If you don't have our backs, then don't expect us to have yours." A kid my sister went to high school with called 911 because his dad was drunk and hitting the mum. The police didn't arrest the dad, but they took him away in the police car, calmed down the mother and made sure she wasn't seriously injured. They then turned to the kid, who was like 15 or 16 years old, and rip into him about how irresponsible he was to call 911 and that his dad would be fired from his job if he got arrested. Then went on about how they'd lose the house and his parents would probably get divorced if his dad lost his job about this. Dad was a police sergeant in the next town over that was well known to the responding officers. I worked as a tribal officer for about 25 years and issued tickets to other officers, correctional officers, and politicians. It didn't matter to me who that person was that I had arrested. I also arrested other cops and ordered my own brother to be arrested. I wasn't the primary officer on scene. The responding officer was trying to be helpful by letting me know so I could take him home. So I was a sergeant at the time and never gave breaks to officers or family members. Nothing ever happened to me. I was threatened, but nothing ever came from it. However, speaking as chief of police was different. When I was being interviewed, I told the tribal council, who did the hiring for the chief position, that I don't play politics. I did my job and got things done. 14 months later, I was told that the tribal council was talking about me, and by the time I got there, I was removed. My appeals process was never followed either. My old criminal justice teacher, who used to be a cop, once told us a story about how he got pulled over by a cop from a different city, but still the same county. He tried telling him he was a cop and showed his badge, but the cop wasn't having it. He got so annoyed that he got out of his car and walked up to the cop writing the ticket and started mouthing off to him, which definitely didn't help. The next couple of months, my teacher's city and the other cop's city got into a ticket war, and they'd write each other tickets if they saw that they were a cop from the other city. So basically, they got into a police ticket war. While on the one hand, it's actually great to see cops holding each other accountable, on the other hand, this is a lot of public resources being misused over a petty squabble. Pretty irritating that this is what all their time and energy was going into. Next up, another example of this grossness. My dad, 29 years CHP, once pulled over a dispatcher for something like expired registration. They tried to worm out of it along the lines of professional courtesy, but Dad wasn't having it and issued the citation. Not long after, my mum got pulled over for speeding at less than 5 over, and here's the officer on the radio confirming her identity. There's a price for principle, which is a shame. The only time I think I've ever pulled over or encountered another law enforcement officer is traffic accident related. An accident I witnessed myself while investigating another accident. Roads were icy and we had about 5 accidents, one after the other. I watched this deputy cause the accident, mostly due to his bald tires. I cited him. I also got called into a neighboring city to investigate a traffic accident where the cop was at fault. Had to cite him as well. That being said, I've been cited by other cops. Recently, I was driving to Vegas and a state trooper got me. I had a firearm in the console next to me and I notified him. Let him know it was right there in view and that I was a cop. He cited me for the full amount over just because I was a cop and should have known better. No argument there. One of our officers got arrested for DUI last year by our neighboring agency, got arrested on a Friday, and quit the following Tuesday. Also got called onto the highway to investigate an accident involving a trooper in her patrol vehicle. She'd rear-ended the person in front of her. Watched the dash camera in her car, traffic began to slow, everyone started to skid due to black ice, and she bumped the vehicle in front of her. I didn't cite her, but did list her as at fault on the state accident form. I have absolutely written tickets to other cops for several reasons. First, they know better. 2, it's hypocritical. They're doing something they'd write tickets for in their home jurisdiction. And 3, it's disrespectful when they flash their badges or something. They know they're asking me to make an ethical compromise. Now, if they're doing something that I would 50-50 give a warning for to an average person, they're vastly more likely to get a warning. Think 8 to 9 over the limit or a cell phone. And it's the same for dismissible offenses, like no driver's license on their possession, something that would get dismissed by the court for anyone by law normally. But if it's something that I'd 100% write a ticket for, they're not going to get a warning instead. Some cops are very respectful and will only say something after the stop is over and done with. Some you can tell just because they act slightly out of the ordinary, like they'll address you properly, as trooper, deputy, officer, or put their hands on the wheel, roll all the windows down, stuff like that. Some people try to mention it on the sly, like, "I've got my off-duty weapon with me," being the favorite. Others will literally hang their badge out the window as they come to a stop. I mean, really? This also happens with the military. They'll casually hand their military ID over with their driver's license. Anyway, that's about it. You can tell that some get a bit salty when they realize they're getting a ticket anyway, but none of them have argued to me so far because there's absolutely nothing for them to stand on. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My sister's a cop. She'd give anyone a ticket if they were doing something stupid. She told me she gave a cop from a neighboring town a speeding ticket. He said, "What about professional courtesy?" She said, "That's what I was thinking. Professional courtesy would be not driving 65 in a 35 zone in the town where I work." We have a street racing law in Ontario, Canada, that if you're going 50 kilometers an hour over the limit, that they can tow and impound your car without due process. Makes sense with a 40k limit, but less sense at the 100k limit on the highways. I mean, at that point, you're speeding, not racing, as traffic usually moves at 120 to 130 normally. Anyway, cops running a speed trap on the highway snagged an on-duty officer in an unmarked car from a different detachment. They charged her, impounded the car, and then unleashed a crap storm. I was issued a citation once. Coming home from vacation, 10-hour drive, I'd been obeying all the traffic laws, but when we hit my state and then my county, I felt safe and stepped on it. Got lit up with blue lights almost 2 minutes later. I immediately noticed a second officer staying back by the vehicle since it's customary for officers in my area to have their own unit. I figured this guy was a trainee. He identified himself, his agency, and reason for stop. I produced my driver's license, insurance, and registration and politely informed him that I had a weapon in the vehicle. He asked if I had a concealed license, and I said no. That should have led him to ask why I was carrying, and at that point I would have informed him I was an off-duty deputy sheriff. He didn't ask and just said, "Okay," and walked off. 10 minutes later he comes back with a citation. Asked me for my phone number, to write in the citation, and name of my employer. So I said something county sheriff's office, I'm county 45. At this point he asked me why I didn't tell him I was a cop. I told him that it wasn't something I was allowed to do off the bat like that, and I wasn't playing that card. Took my citation and drove off. Got a call not 2 minutes later from his FTO apologizing and asked me to pull over and wait on him. He voided the citation and apologized. There was nothing for him to apologize for, but I did tell him he needed to address the whole "I have a weapon" thing with his rookie. My grandmother was a police officer some time ago, and while not another officer, she ended up arresting a local government official. He'd been drunk driving and crashed his car into multiple other parked cars, streetlights, and finally a building, doing ridiculous amounts of damage, but he was able to walk away and right to jail. After she booked him, in 4-inch heels, I might add, her superiors freaked the F out and demanded she release him because of who he was. If I recall correctly, she told them that they'd have to do it themselves. Pretty sure all the charges were wiped and he went home that night. She quit shortly after the incident. Before that, she was in the Navy. After law enforcement, she became a trauma nurse, and now she's very happily retired. Huh. Yuck. Look, there should be a certain egregious level of crime that nobody's immune to, and causing several tens of thousands of dollars worth of damage should be included in that list. Cops are meant to protect society from dangers like this inebriated maniac, and he should have been beholden to the same laws that would apply to a poorer person who slightly dinged someone's vehicle. Gross. My wife is a trooper. She was driving to work one morning with the cruiser as she was double-backing shifts. On the highway, a car comes flying up behind her and then decides to pass her and a bunch of other cars at a high enough speed that she decides to pull them over. Never pass the highway pace car, kids. Guy pulls over, she does all the normal cop stuff and then gets out and starts walking up. She notices the guy hanging something out the window at her, walks closer, and sees it's a badge. She acknowledged the guy, asked for license, registration, insurance, and he keeps pointing the badge at her. She asks again for his info. He shows her the badge harder, which just annoyed her more. She acknowledges the badge, asks again for his info. He finally relented and gave it over. She wrote him a ticket. He goes to work to his tiny local station and complains to his boss about the witch trooper who had pulled him over and gave him attitude. His boss calls her boss. Her boss sends his boss the recording of the stop. He's no longer an officer now and is now a security guard at a hospital. I have a feeling his boss was looking for any reason to get rid of him. I did have this encounter with a cop that ended with him being arrested. I was living in a fairly weapon-friendly state, Pennsylvania. Carry permits were not required for a sidearm unless you were carrying one concealed, including transporting one in the cabin of your car. I had one for work. My background was as an insurance adjuster. I found myself, for a time, doing insurance fraud investigation for a private investigator. After an incredibly overzealous neighbor decided to assert dominance over the parking spot in front of his house by smashing my windshield with a baseball bat, I was in the car and I was watching someone a block away that had nothing to do with this clown. It was decided that I'd be carrying from then on. After a very long day of surveillance that started at 4 a.m., I stopped by the gas station at the end of my block to fill up the tank and get some snacks before tucking in for the night. I had a rare full weekend off and I was itching to get home. As I was paying, I must have shifted my coat to where the guy behind in line saw that I had my piece holstered on my hip. He interrupts my transaction to demand to know if I have a carry permit. I tell the stranger to mind his own business and I continue paying. Concerned stranger pulls out a badge and tells me that he's a municipal officer of a small town about 10 miles away. He again demands my permit and ID. I observe that we're not in said small town 10 miles away, and therefore, here in a larger town beneath our feet, he's just a regular citizen. He informs me that I'm not to leave as I'm being detained. He's calling the city police and I'm in deep doo-doo. His words for resisting. I just want to get my beef jerky, chips, and Mountain Dew home. But okay, apparently we're doing this. City police arrived within about 10 minutes. They separate us. The city cop asks me about the weapon. Do you have a permit? Yep, here it is. I'm also an insurance adjuster and I just got off work. I hand him the permit, my employer's ID card, and the badge issued by the county in that state. The cop is super chill. He goes back to his car, comes back a few minutes later, and hands me everything. He thanks me for not being a jerk. All the while, Barney Fife is being a complete moron and is making demands of the city cops. This guy basically wanted me charged with everything shy of murder, and they weren't complying because, well, I hadn't broken any laws. Apparently, when he wouldn't show some stranger his ID didn't work, he decided to back up his game by telling the cop that I looked like I was about to rob the store and was just going for my weapon when he stopped me. Now, this was a special kind of stupid move for a few reasons. Not the least of which being that there were witnesses to him being a butthole and it was a convenience store with surveillance cameras. It didn't rise to that level, however, as a quick conversation with the clerk indicated he was full of crap. So I was about to head out when one of them says to him, I wasn't aware that Town X had its own police department. When did you start there? Well, I'm actually the town constable, but if you read the state constitution, that allows me to serve as the chief law enforcement officer of the town where I'm elected. All kinds of nope. Cop cuts him off and tells him to put his hands behind his back. To my dying days, I think my happiest memory may be recalling the look of confused horror on his face when he realized that these cops weren't going to comply with his little arrest fantasy and that he was going to jail. Constables are elected, and they do have peace officer status, but they also seem to have a serious issue with overstepping their authority in that particular state. Okay, so this wasn't a cop, but I will say as someone intimately familiar with these people who get drunk off their tiny amounts of power that this is hilariously satisfying. What a moron. Prepared to lie about an innocent man to get to take part in an arrest as well. Get bent. I ticketed an air marshal one time, not a police officer, but still within law enforcement. He was going 65 in a 35 zone. He was about to hit a 25 zone right by our elementary school and showed no signs of slowing down. I happened to be driving out to take a report and saw him flying into town and flipped on the radar. I was no longer working traffic at the time, but that was way too fast heading into town, so I flipped around and pulled him over. As I approached his convertible, the music was blaring and he did not bother to turn it down. When I instructed him to do so, he flashed his ID as if that explained everything. He seemed shocked that I insisted he turn his music down and requested his driver's license and registration. He explained, while still holding up his ID, that he was a federal air marshal and didn't have time to chit-chat. I smiled and informed him he should have thought about that before he went flying through town at 65. I added that he could speed the process up by providing me with the documentation I requested. After some grumping, he finally produced said information. I wrote him a ticket. The attitude cost him any chance of me taking it easy on him. If he was shocked when I made him give me his license and insurance, he was doubly shocked when I produced the ticket and told him his court date. Generally speaking, I hate giving traffic citations, but sometimes it can be enjoyable. I had a message waiting for me in a few hours when I swung back to fill out some paperwork. His supervisor had called and wanted to give me a chance to explain myself before he called the assistant chief to report my behavior. I offered to bring the chief, who was in the office that evening, onto the phone for him so he could discuss. He declined. After he dropped the huff and puff, we discussed the citation. I walked him through the traffic stop and the behavior of his subordinate. He apologized for wasting my time. He let slip this individual was a bit of a hothead, so the behavior was not really surprising, though it was unacceptable. The air marshal called back the next day and apologized for his behavior in a voicemail. Then he showed up in court a month later to fight the citation. I mentioned to the city attorney that I still had his voicemail apology, which included him admitting he was driving way too fast. The city attorney passed that information along, he paid the ticket, and we all went about the rest of our lives. Ladies, what is something that guys don't actually need to feel insecure about? Oh, liking cats, especially kittens. Why do some guys get their boxes in a twist about cooing over animals that are objectively cute and lovable? Chill out and pet the damn cat. Their bum. I wish you'd said this 3 months ago. Now what am I supposed to do with this bubble butt? Singing. I love when I'm at a chill pizza joint and the cooks in the kitchen are singing. It doesn't even matter if they're not great singers. I love when people are happy enough to sing. Guys aren't there to protect and be a shoulder to cry on. They need love and affection as well as we women. It's totally okay to need a safe place now and then just to talk. You don't have to be emotionless. We don't need strong hands wrapped around us. We can hold hands and walk side by side. Your height and muscle weight is not as relevant as some toxic people may make you think it is. When they arrive, as in the bedroom sense, quickly. I am honored, sir. I would never judge someone for that because I know it's not in their control. But I also definitely don't expect it to mean that the doing of the deed is over. It's okay to not be the smartest person in the room. Admitting that you don't know or understand a thing does not make you look weak. Blustering your way through makes you seem like an arrogant idiot. Admitting that you don't know something already makes you smarter than average. Being vocal when they arrive. I've seen so many guys just hold their breath and try to choke off any sound that might come out of their throat when they arrive. And I'm just a little sad, like, what are you afraid of? I want to know that you're having fun. I want to know you enjoy what's happening. Be loud about it. Screw the neighbors. Some friends of mine are really insecure about not being able to grow a beard. To be honest, it doesn't really matter. Yeah, at some point, those of us unable to grow a beard, narrator included, just have to accept and love our little scrubby teenage faces the way they are. And honestly, could be worse. There are some guys who look great with a beard, but who definitely shouldn't not have one. They've got to keep those things through summer, and I feel sorry for them. You don't need to worry about appearing feminine over certain stupid things, like thinking a puppy is cute, or wearing pink, or being generally friendly and smiley. Women like that stuff and get annoyed and exhausted by men who take masculinity too far. I didn't realize some people think that thinking a puppy is cute was feminine. No regrets. I want to hug and pet all the puppies I can. I do baby talk with the puppies even though I don't want kids. The flip side of the comments about not being able to grow a beard. Guys shouldn't feel insecure about being hairy. Yeah, that includes hairy butts, backs, legs, and shoulders. I love me a hairy chest, and I don't find a hairy back or shoulders to be a problem. I think the only thing I might ask someone to trim would be crazy nose hair, though that could be disguised by a good mustache. Like most things listed here, yeah, you'll find women who won't like it, but if they're willing to write you off for something physical that's out of your control, they're probably not the person for you. I will say, regardless of anything else, hygiene is also important. If you're hairy, you might sweat more depending on the climate and how warm you run. But if you shower regularly and keep everything clean, it's all good. I wonder how many guys came in to look at the other comments here, hoping to hear someone say, sausage size. Crying. Men crying is my kryptonite. It just makes me want to love them and hold them forever. It can be so difficult to do. I didn't cry for probably 10 years due to getting told my entire life that men don't cry, suck it up, princess, by just about every other man in my life. After 2 years of allowing myself to feel, the one thing that broke my crying dry streak was my cat dying. That was the only thing in 10 years that managed to move me to tears. Thankfully, I'm getting better at it. Balding. So many guys try to hide it or even get plugs or constantly wear hats. Just keep the sides cut close, like buzzed or shaved, and most women will actually think it's pretty attractive. A friend of mine shows signs of balding already. He seems pretty confident about it, saying at one point that he's just going to shave it all. Honestly, his confidence is attractive. No matter what the hair looks like, confidence makes all the difference. Don't feel insecure about liking girly things. Order that fruity drink, watch that rom-com, and sing in the shower. A lot less people care than you might realize. A good example is actually happening right now. I'm at a pool party. There's 2 very nice, overweight guys who are in the pool, but they're both wearing t-shirts to cover their guts and just standing around. Then there's a third heavy-set guy who easily has an extra 40 pounds on the other 2. He's shirtless and having the time of his life playing with abandon in the pool basketball game and cracking jokes. He's way more attractive to the girls because he isn't ashamed of his body and he exudes confidence. Should all 3 of them lose weight? I mean, sure, most of us should. But don't stop having fun because you're ashamed of yourself. Live your life and have fun. That's very attractive to all people. Just my opinion. I'm a middle-aged woman and I think I have a bit of wisdom about things like this. I've seen some crap. Ha! They should stop feeling insecure about showing emotion, especially in a relationship. I know a lot of guys grew up being told that showing emotion was girly, but honestly, when a guy is open about how he's feeling and doesn't suppress it, it makes everyone feel more secure. When the girl feels like she's the only one who has real feelings in the relationship, then it's hard to trust the guy. And the guy often feels misunderstood as he isn't conveying what he wants to. Guys, please know it's okay to be emotional. You deserve to be honest with the people around you, and it makes relationships so much better for everyone involved. Being too skinny. As a formerly skinny guy, unless you have reasonable eating habits, it won't last. Word of warning to guys in your teens and early 20s who are insecure about being skinny: if you can eat a ton and never gain weight, chances are you won't always be skinny. You'll have the opposite problem later. Sausage size and their body weight. I understand some people might think this is a lie, but I personally think so as a woman because size is not what determines how good bedroom fun times are. Some may have a preference, but with 7 billion people in this world, I think preferences are diverse. Plus, women have different size equipment down there as well. Many people forget that. As for weight, you should love your body. Confidence is attractive. It should only be put to concern if your health is affected by it. Also, this is of course my opinion. It's not a lie because this is genuinely how I think. I know there are people out there who can agree, while others may not. Don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard a lot of guys are insecure or care a lot about their hair. One of my guy friends once told me that he spends a good 15 minutes in the morning styling so that it looks okay. Honestly, I don't really notice a guy's hair unless it's drastically different from everyone else's. Like, buzz cut, super long, or just some wild hair. I've had a lot of guy friends who are really insecure about their pimples or acne. I'll tell them that everyone gets them and everyone is insecure about it, but their response is usually something like, "Girls have makeup to hide it." And so I taught a few of them how to subtly put on concealer so they could feel more confident. Felt good. Guys shouldn't feel so insecure about their body shape. You don't have to have big biceps or washboard abs in order for a girl to like you. Haha, and some of us who do have those things still couldn't land a woman while we were single most of the time. Confidence, fellas, it's all confidence. Like I've said, I've had more partners at times of my life where I was feeling good about myself than when I was in tip-top shape. I'm a guy, I'm just here for the self-esteem boost. Guys shouldn't feel insecure about stereotypical masculine standards. You want to do handicrafts like sew or crochet or scrapbook? Great, we can do it together. I suck at those things as a woman though, so the farthest I'll probably get is watching YouTube tutorials with you. You can wear cute things and accessories like scarves and handbags. Heck, you can borrow mine. If you need some time to unload emotionally with a bubble bath or a one-on-one afternoon tea about whatever jerk you encountered a couple of days ago, it doesn't mean you're weak or unreliable. It means that you know how to handle your emotions in a controlled and healthy way. Moobs. I've had a bulgy chest for the longest time. I've been trying so hard to lose weight and I'm making some progress, but I really won't feel confident until my stupid tatas stop poking out. And they're still poking out. Makes me hate taking pictures of myself in certain lighting. Guys should not worry so much that they can't solve a Rubik's Cube puzzle. Although it's mostly rare, a few chicks have dated guys who can't solve it. Eggplant size. Anything above 8 inches is probably uncomfortable for the old hole. Larger not necessarily meaning better goes for girth as well. Don't feel insecure about showing your feminine side or of being emotional or sharing any interests or beliefs that may not be considered manly. Seriously, I love a guy who's confident enough with himself to be open and different. Until the rest of society deems it okay for men to be like that, expect it to be hard to find a man who does that. Some women may want that, but why would they feel comfortable when the rest of society is telling them that the best way is to conform to the usual standards? Height. I know the popular presumption is that anyone under 6 feet is screwed, but if a girl considers a couple of inches to be a deal breaker, she's not worth your time anyway. I'm short, but lots of my tall and beautiful friends have dated men somewhat quite a bit shorter than them. It's no big deal. And to all the guys snarking about how the above isn't true, I promise you that kind of crappy attitude is way more unattractive than any physical characteristic. And if the only woman you ever want truly all diss you for your height, well, I'd look inwardly about your own tastes as well. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Don't feel insecure about the size of your Johnson. It really is about what you do with it, and honestly, guys with big uns are just painful most of the time. A lot of them also just fall back on the size of their member as an excuse to be kind of bad in bed. Don't be worried about your body hair, being too hairy or not having enough hair. If someone isn't into you because your hair isn't Goldilocks just right, then they aren't really worth the time to get into a relationship with. If she's complaining when she meets you that you don't have enough hair, or have too much hair, or don't have hair in the places she wants, and have hair in the places she doesn't, what's it going to be like 10 years down the road? Don't worry about having a gym body. It's much better to just be healthy, and a lot of the guys with massive muscles just aren't. Also, a lot of them just put stress on the women they're with to be as built as they are. As well, what appeals to the eye is not also the same as what appeals to the other senses. For that matter, what appeals to the eye isn't always huge muscles and a little fat. That's just a part of the media pressure that's telling all women they should look just like Kim Kardashian. Then there's money. Just the same as the gym body. Financial success is one element women may look at, but it's usually just one of very many. Back to the idea of hair, if she's just looking at your financial success, what's it going to be like in 10 years if you lose your job? If you wouldn't hold a woman to the same standard, don't feel like you should have to live up to that for her. Your relationship should be about equality and actually sharing your life, even if you're just looking at short term. That Saturday night is a chunk of your life. If you're not getting something from it, if you're just living up to her standards, then it isn't worth your time. Being macho or acting strong all the time is not that important to most women. It's one of those pressures society puts on you. It's okay to say you're scared. It's okay to say you're depressed. It's okay not to fight someone just because they're trying to insult you in public. It's okay to just be a person. If you like video games and eating pizza on the weekend, it's not okay for someone to tell you that's wrong. There are women out there that would be like, cool, hand me a slice and the second controller. You're not automatically in the wrong because a woman wants something different. The things a lot of women are saying in this thread are nice, but that's just it. They're nice words. A lot of women do care about Johnson length or height, and they find it weird that when men show emotion. Real life is different than your fantasies, people. Well, that's the thing that makes me vastly unhappy, to be honest. There are internet forums just like this, but about what guys think about girls, and I feel the same way. But when it comes to this, I honestly don't care about height or showing emotions or the size of your eggplant. But for a lot of people, things like that do matter, which is why everyone's insecure. I know many women who think similarly. Most of our insecurities come from our own heads or social media saying there's a right and wrong way. I know sometimes it's hard to believe people find you attractive, but the truth is a lot of people do. You just haven't found many of them yet. Not being able to grow a beard. A lot of us prefer if a guy doesn't have a beard. Receding hairlines. They don't look so bad. Toupees and comb-overs, though, look terrible. Just rock whatever you have. And short guys, don't make up for your height with extra macho or big hair. You're just as hot as tall guys if you have confidence, without arrogance. First, back hair. It's hair, it's fine. 2, having a belly instead of abs. It's just more comfortable anyway. 3, not having huge arms. See above. 4, not having a massive member. I found it's more of a hindrance, especially if they don't know how to use it. And 5, crying or having emotions in general. We like that. You don't have to be super tough, macho, or masculine all the time. Just be yourself. Guys, you aren't nerds or neckbeards if you play video games. I don't know about other females, but I love them, and the decent ones don't mind. Oh, I've got one more. Dad bods. A lot of guys are insecure because they aren't all muscle and toned and don't have a six-pack. Dad bods are actually really nice. I'd rather cuddle with someone who feels human than someone who feels like a rock. You know, muscles don't feel hard when they're relaxed. I will concede this last person's point to the contrary. Muscles are actually very comfortable to lie on when they aren't being used or flexed, and big pecs are actually very comfortable. This is brought to you by the straight male narrator who has admittedly only limited time laying his head on other men's chests. Probably being super masculine. I understand some girls like to have a big buff boyfriend, but seriously guys, don't worry about it too much. Crying, especially in front of someone that you trust. I guess, in general, opening up to people. Please don't disrespect your luscious, long hair. Look, go to the gym all you want, dip into psychology, do what you want to do to improve yourself as a human being. Just leave your frickin' hair alone if you prefer your long hair. Nothing makes my heart beat faster than a man who embraces his long, natural hair. I swear, I get heart palpitations. Your feminine side or your height. A lot of people don't care about height, and a lot of women like when a man can be feminine, the same as when guys like girls that can be tomboyish. Starbucks barista. Don't be ashamed of your drink. Pink drink, frappuccino, chai tea, they're delicious, and we want you to have a tasty drink. Being insecure. Are you having a bad day? Tell me. You don't feel hot? Tell me, I'll be your hype man. And knowing that I'm wrong. I know some guys who don't like to correct their girlfriend or wife, but please tell me if I'm wrong. Not saying it to embarrass me and leave me humiliated, just let me know. Thank you for that. Some of us really just need a hype man. Also, what are you, some sort of sensible person? I'm not generalizing, I know most women aren't like this, but I spend so much time around these people, I sometimes forget that not everyone is like that. I work with a group of incredibly toxic women. Everyone who's been hired in the last 2 years has quit because of the 4 same girls. You can't correct them, they just get mad. If you're a man and you call in, then you need to grow a pair, but if you're a woman, oh, then take as much time as you need, honey. If you're new, they'll call you out for doing something wrong, but will barely try to explain how to fix it. Worst of all, they talk crap about everyone. They'll talk crap about you while you're in the room, and when you say something, they act like you insulted them. Some people get really up in arms about men calling women the B-word, but sometimes B-words can be B-words. I kind of went off on a rant here, sorry about that, I just needed to tell someone about the crap going down in my office. Showing feelings and being emotional. Also, moaning in bed. Oh, the moans. When I'm doing things right, my husband will cut loose and I love it. Balding or hair loss. Most of you will lose your hair. A good chunk of you will start losing it in your 20s. You're just as attractive as you were before. You are more than your hair. Showing emotions. Over the years, I found it way harder to handle no or rarely any shown emotion from male friends or boyfriends. You know, stuff like crying. Often, I'd rather see a guy cry than seeming to be emotionless. A lot of my guy friends will rant about something or be upset, but then backtrack and say, sorry, I was overreacting. You're entitled to your emotions, no matter what gender you are. I wish my boyfriend would believe me when I tell him it's okay if he doesn't get me there every time we have fun in the bedroom together. I still enjoy it all the same. Every time I see these comments, you all convince me I'm supposed to be swimming in women, but I'm not. Basically, anything you can't control. If anyone tries to shame you for your height, hair, beard, or no beard, or Johnson size, they're complete idiots and not worth your time. But also, being skinny. I see a lot of body shaming towards guys about that, and it actually breaks my heart. You don't have to be muscular or big or anything. So many girls like slender men. But not slender man, he's scary. Not being able to do the Fortnite dance. Don't ask. From what I gather in all these top comments, a guy who has a short Johnson, hairless face with acne all over, weighs 110 pounds, is 5 foot, and dumb as a bag of rocks shouldn't feel at all like they have attributes that can be improved. Lies. I believe you have wildly misinterpreted the purpose of this post. It's more or less for being okay with who you are. There are some things like downstairs size and height and hairline that you can't control and you shouldn't bother feeling insecure about. Their height. If Danny DeVito can be the hot thing that he is at his stature, then so can you. I mean, it helps that he has a magnum dong. Their stomachs. My brothers, nephew, and dad almost always refuse to get into a public pool or body of water without a shirt because they're a little heavier than some other guys. The first time we took our nephew to the pool, he started crying when we told him to take his shirt off because he was embarrassed about it. I know that I personally don't give a rat's butt about a guy's stomach, along with most other people I know. Laughs in bright red stretch marks. The inability to grow facial hair. My husband has a mean beard. He gets a lot of guys complimenting it, and they'll tell him how insecure they are about not being able to grow anything. He always says to them, "Well, you wish you had one, but I wish I looked as good as you without one." Gets them in the feels a couple of times. That's how bad some people want it. Oh, and guys shouldn't be afraid of compliments from each other. It doesn't make you gay or feminine. Well, the compliment one is actually new in this grouping, but yes, apart from that, we do seem to be reaching the limits of this topic. In short, don't be worried about your weight, hair, eggplant size, or sensitivity. Just do what you think works best for you without masking it, and if you work on making yourself happy in your other pursuits, you'll probably be more confident and attractive in any case. Height. If a girl wouldn't date you for your height, you're better off without them. Also, facial hair. I'm here to get my confidence boosted. Anyone else? They shouldn't feel insecure about their preferences. They like what they like. Skin tone, body type, hair. We like what we like and we can't change that. And all this goes for girls as well. The duration of the deed. We get it. Sometimes things get superheated and it ends quicker than you'd like. Firstly, sometimes it's flattering, but secondly, we really don't mind. Just talk to your partner or go for round 2. Or better yet, help your partner out in the meantime. Wink. Seriously, the biggest killer of mood is being a neurotic, uptight butthole. If you're nice, charming, clean, adventurous, respectful, confident, non-judgmental, and mature, you'll have more fun and better, more meaningful relationships than if you try to be Mr. Gigolo Romeo. Sweat. My boyfriend was so insecure about his sweat, he went out of his way to stay dry, wear strong deodorants, stuff like that. Newsflash, you guys look and smell awesome when you're crusty-dusty. Please do not confuse crusty-dusty with a lack of hygiene though. Smelling today's scent is definitely not the same as smelling a week's worth of stank. Surgeons. What's the weirdest thing you've had to remove from someone's butt? I was the patient's family doctor, and took care of him in the family hospital for his short stay after. He had a cue ball get stuck up there. Not sure exactly what he thought would be the way to get out of it. We had a lot of trouble getting it out too. The conversation of the surgeons trying to come up with a way to get it out was pretty hilarious. Hello folks, early commentary from the narrator here. I've often reflected in our medical videos that they seem to be like 1/3 people just shoving things up there and pretending that they tripped and fell on them, and then I saw this entire topic and I just thought, oh boy. And there are a lot of potential answers to choose from. Enjoy and prepare to feel a lot of sympathetic pain. ER doctor here. As a veteran on the job, it becomes hard to distinguish what is weird anymore, so judge for yourselves. 3 lemons, about a foot of a broom handle, a light bulb, which did not survive its adventure, so many toilet brushes, inserted brush and handle first, a series of toothpicks, any number of bottles, aerosol cans, stuff like that. And my favorite one was a simple, regular marital aid. We x-rayed it, and the radiologist's report read, there is an approximately 15 centimeter cylindrical foreign body in the large intestine extending proximally from the rectum. Judging by the indistinct outline of the foreign body, I suspect it is still turned on. Had a guy come in with a capped section of PVC pipe filled with mercury because he liked the sloshing when he'd jerk in his turkin. Had to call hazmat, and security also had to be called when he became violent because they wouldn't give the mercury-laden pipe back. ER nurse. I've seen baseballs, loads of the actual correct toys for the insertion, cans of soda, and vegetables. There should be a public service announcement about using those marital aids in the butt. It needs to have the jewels, or just some sort of base so that it doesn't get lost up there. Women's toys don't need them, as there's only so far up that they'll go. A doctor I worked with once told a man, it's okay if you want to put things up your butt, you just have to use the right things. An enormous silicone butt plug which broke off at its base inside the patient. It was shaped like a soft cone on a stalk with the base at the bottom. Had to remove it in pieces. Also an Orangina bottle 2 years before this butt plug. Would you have grounds for compensation or suing if a actual purpose-built toy broke like that? I'm not gonna buy one, rip off the base and pop it in myself for those wondering. I'm just imagining this happening between a couple and the first moments and facial expressions of the plugger and pluggee, the latter staring at the plugless base in their hand. Oh, so many questions. A friend of mine is a surgery resident, and during one of her trauma shifts, an addict walked in with an incandescent light bulb in his rear end. It was shoved in with the wide part first. They were dilating the rectum in an attempt to remove it, and the resident in charge of the procedure managed to accidentally separate the metal base from the glass globe, which immediately shattered under the pressure of the colon. They had to perform a partial colectomy to resolve the complication. Crystal is one hell of a substance. A foreign body per rectum is a fairly common occurrence. In my time rotating in the ER, the most common things have been yucca roots, avocados, shampoo bottles, and a few other things. But that light bulb story is still unmatched. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen the X-ray. I am a veterinarian, the plastic baggies that people use to clean up after their pets on walks. They unspooled in his gut and spread from stomach to colon. His owners realized what had happened when he started pooping out bags and brought him to the ER. My coworker went in to cut him, and the scene she described was hilarious. He would intermittently strain a little and poop out a little section of bags. Someone would tear them off, and he'd be okay for a bit and then poop out some more, like he was dispensing them for himself. He was fine after surgery. When I worked in the ER, we had a guy come in with a 6-battery mag light stuck up Main Street. The funny part is that it was inserted bulb out and it was turned on. So he laid him down prone and the doctor spread his cheeks, and then the room lit up like he just cracked open Marcellus Wallace's briefcase. Back when I was an ER tech, we had this guy come in with a full-size bottle of VO5 shampoo up his butt. Of course he said he fell on it in the shower. You could clearly see it on the X-ray. It was pretty spectacular. The best part was he knew exactly what needed to be done to get it out, suggesting this wasn't the first time. He asked for conscious sedation and for someone to pull it out. Well, the ER doctor tried that, and then tried manually to get it out with forceps, and was essentially elbow deep in this guy. But he couldn't get it. He had to go into the operating room to get it taken out. I bumped into the surgeon a few days later and asked him how it went. He joked to me that after we knocked him out, I grabbed a plunger out of the bathroom and got it out that way. But then he told me all he had to do was stick some suction cup up there till he felt it connect and then slowly pull it out. According to the surgeon, this guy never presented any sort of identification or insurance card and demanded to pay his entire bill before he left. Usually it takes some time for bills to get finalized. He paid it completely in cash and then left via a taxi. You know, I'd be more interested in what non-medical people have had to help people remove from their butts. My cat swallowed dental floss and I had to pull it out of her butt. I'm not a medical professional, just a grossed-out lady with a new lidded trash bin. Not my story, but my friend is a radiographer. A guy came into the hospital with Barbie dolls up his butt. After scans, one came out without too much issue, but the other one was way too far up there. They were worried that if it was pulled out, its arms would open and puncture the bowel. So they scheduled surgery, the X-ray staff waiting excitedly for news. The surgeon then returned and with a serious voice announced, "We found Ken." My nurse wife told me that a man had an apple removed from his butt, but I never understood how this could be possible. I often think about this, but I've never asked for more details. I'll ask her over the table at Christmas dinner though. Okay, disappointing update. I didn't ask her at the Christmas table. There were small children around and everyone was having a nice time, and it didn't seem cool to just bring it up. Also, no one else started any butt stuff related conversations, providing an opening for my inquiry. I asked her today, but also told her about my story on here. She didn't feel comfortable sharing the details with you guys, so I guess you'll just have to use your imagination. Someone posted about a similar situation and suggested they'd possibly worked with my wife. However, based on the specific details in their post, I'm sure it was a separate apple or butt-related incident. Oh, and you can safely get things bigger than an apple in a butthole, by the way. Your rectum is pretty stretchy if you go slow. Yes, as we've had pointed out in one of our videos lately, you can apparently fit 2 small raccoons up there, which is a great testament to the flexibility of that orifice, but also a horrifying prospect. Fingers crossed that nobody here has managed that. Wowie wowie, do I know a lot of cases involving falling on things and other such excuses. Here are just some of the things that I know. A Buzz Lightyear action figure, a Barbie doll, plaster of Paris. They wanted a mold of his colon. Instead, it had to be cut open as it was glued shut by the plaster. Glasses, the sight kind. Jewelry, mostly necklaces. A cucumber, which, after proclaiming he fell over in the garden naked and landed on his cucumber patch, still had the Tesco wrapper on it. And finally, a light bulb. Finally, on a rather dark note, if you're a fool who slipped something up their black hole, because the butt just sucks things in disturbingly well, and you can't retrieve it, please, for the love of God, go to your doctor. People have died due to the toxic shock due to this crap. A guy here died of it in 2 weeks due to having a marital aid stuck up there and never went to his doctor. Your pride can recover, but you can't recover from death. Not me, but a good friend I've known since 6th grade who's an emergency room doctor. Straight couple in their early 20s were using a vibrating toy on her. Then they switched positions, he said it was his first time, and they had lubricant everywhere, and the slim 6-inch vibrating toy disappeared all the way up in him while it was still on. They waited and tried to get it out on their own and finally went into the ER. They were going to wait until the batteries died, but it was getting real late. My buddy tried to get it out, but he couldn't. He told the guy that they might have to do surgery to get it. The guy asks my buddy, if he has to go into surgery, can my buddy please call his mum and tell her? My buddy laughs and says, "You're 22. You get to call your mum and tell her you have a buzzing, vibrating toy in your butt that might be perforating your colon." Then my buddy remembers a guy he went to medical school with who works in the same hospital. He has freaky long fingers like E.T. that might work. The other doctor gloves up and gets the thing out, still buzzing. Just an FYI, it is really easy for this to happen, so limit the lubricant on your hands. Your colon gets like a suction thing in it and things go in easy like what happened to these guys. A homeless woman, frequent flyer and substance user came in to see us with abdominal pain. The X-ray revealed 17 oval-shaped objects in her downstairs space. They were removed by a very diligent medical resident armed with a speculum and McGill forceps, with the aid of an ultrasound tech. 17 Barbie doll heads. Their removal was made a bit easier by their long hair. There was also the man with the small fluorescent bulb in his rectum. He insisted on the doctor in the ER just pulling it out and sending him on his way. But those bulbs break very easily, lacerated colon, and they're full of toxic chemicals, like poisoning. Surgical removal was recommended, but he flatly refused because, hey, what would he tell his wife? He signed out AMA and we never saw him again. Son of a doctor here. My dad removed an entire peeled sweet potato from someone's colon once. The guy swore that he had just slipped and fallen on it. We received a patient with horrible pain that felt like constipation. He couldn't go number 2 and laxatives weren't helping. We soon found out that the blockage wasn't just constipation, it was a string of beads several meters long that had become tangled into an ugly ball inside him. I had to snip it apart and carefully pull pieces of it out. When most of it was out, his butt became a rocket engine with diarrhea as the propellant. Does this mean that you're a rocket surgeon now? Please, Doc, you've got to help me. Something's wrong with me, but I'm sure the dozens of butt beads that I crammed up my butt have nothing to do with it. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I've seen a small-size Fanta orange soda can get pulled straight out of a man's butt. Did you drink it? I once had a flatmate who was a nurse. She had a patient who came in complaining of stomach pains, which was caused by the cucumber he had shoved up his butt a couple of days earlier. Apparently the smell caused by pickling a cucumber in your colon is extremely nasty. Not the butt, but close to it. My sister worked in a urology clinic and has some very crazy stories ranging from at-home gender surgery procedures to this one case in particular. She had to remove almost 200 BBs from a guy's bladder via his urethra one by one, as the guy had a thing for shoving things down his wee-wee. On my surgery, we had to remove a mini Nerf football from someone's butt. He kept apologizing and saying he wasn't gay. Later, the attending surgeon told us that it's always the straight guys coming in with stuff up their butts, and they always try explaining that they aren't gay. I always love it when they come up with a convoluted story about how the thing got up there. One guy told me with a straight face that he was getting inside his car completely undressed and he forgot there was an avocado on the seat. From looking at the medical videos, I've learned that every type of object known to man has been placed inside of someone's butt somewhere at least once. We progress from sticking everything we see into our mouths as kids to sticking everything into our rear as adults, apparently. Girl I know had suspected cervical cancer. Saw 2 different doctors before a specialist examined her surrounded by trained doctors. He grabbed and pulled on what everyone thought was an inflamed, infected, tumorous cervix. It was a love egg, and it had been in there for 3 months. Don't know what qualifies as weird anymore. Between myself and my friends, there was a glass marital aid, a vibrating marital aid, a travel toothbrush holder, Campbell's soup can, cucumber, mag light, cologne bottle, Sean John, which was unforgivable, time capsule, Light bulb, aerosol, and can cap. The oddest one was literally nothing. Guy comes in complaining of something stuck up their butt by the girlfriend. ER doctor feels and there's nothing there. X-ray and CT scan say maybe something in there? I don't feel anything. In the operating room, I feel deeper and still nothing. Finally do a full colonoscopy, and guess what? Nada. Firstly, when he offhandedly mentions that there's a time capsule up there, what? But also, this was not the video I was expecting to get an Uno reverse card in. Pretty sure there's something on my butt. Oh wait, there isn't, is somehow weirder than the usual suspects. Or maybe I've just been exposed to too many of these stories now. I had a friend in med school whose assignment was to figure out how his cadaver had died. He found about $5 in quarters up the man's butt. Don't shove metal up your butt. Metal poisoning is real. Close friend is a radiologist and identified a marital aid on an X-ray with a diameter of 10 centimeters or 4 inches, and 22 centimeters long lodged in the guy's butt. The dial at the bottom broke off and couldn't get it out. Ended up on the operating table. I work in medical insurance, and we get these internal newsletters from some of our in-house doctors and clinical staff with random medical facts, and had one this week which had a bit about odd things found inside of people, including, but not limited to, a live eel in someone's rectum, which was eating his colon, 40 pocket knives, a Lego tire up a kid's nose from 3 years, a pea plant growing inside a man's lungs, and a candy cane in somebody's rectum. There was a tiny bit of background info with each, but I can't remember all the details. Although the people who write our newsletters are professionals and do educate us about medical conditions and body parts, they do occasionally like to find random stuff to share with us too, like the above. Vet surgeon here might have an unfair advantage in this thread. One time, a dog ate its own foot. The dog came in with a missing paw from the wrist down. The owner had no idea where it went, but the dog also had some serious GI signs. One X-ray elucidated both problems. It's not every day you see an abdomen with a literal limb inside. My ex was a surgeon. A policeman and his wife came in because he had something stuck up his butt. When my ex asked what, the wife said, "A vibrating toy, exactly like this one," and pulled out a 9-inch thing from her handbag. My mum worked in the ER at Johns Hopkins back in the 70s. She pulled a Coke bottle out of a senator's butt. She refuses to say who though because of ethics. I think most people believe that big companies are up the politicians' butts, but this one is taking it a bit too directly. Cassava, and everybody in my country knows it because it showed up in the news because someone in the operating room had the great idea to record a video of it and make it viral. The patient sued the hospital. Middle-aged man goes into the A&E with something up his back package, goes into the X-ray where he sees my girlfriend. And what's up there? 4 baking potatoes. Not the little ones either. Each one's about the size of a fist. As he tells it, he was at home cooking dinner and slipped in the kitchen and 4 potatoes went up his hole. Sure they did. A small sculpture of Jerry Seinfeld made out of fusilli pasta. Internal medicine physician here. Not sure why everyone thinks surgeons would be the ones removing stuff from people's butts when it's probably most often the emergency department or us. Personally, the grossest thing I've manually disimpacted was probably a partially digested whole corn on the cob that the patient had eaten several days prior. Was just pulling out fistfuls of corn for like half an hour. But yes, I've also definitely seen the occasional light bulb, razor blade, or marital aid lost in the abyss. Probably the best story I have here was during residency. My correspondent spent a good amount of time searching around for a Q-tip that a patient lost up his butt while scratching up there. He told the patient he was unsuccessful at finding this thing, only to be asked why in the world he was expecting to find one. Turns out he was supposed to be looking at the patient's roommate's butt. What? Had to go do another rectal exam next door. Must have been an awkward conversation across the curtain later that night. I'm so glad you asked this. My favorite story was a guy who came in with a can of Glade up his butt. What scent, you ask? Timeless joy. One time I tooted and it stunk so bad my friends threatened to shove Febreze up my butt. I'm guessing this first guy's friend went through with it. Heard this from my father-in-law who used to work as an ER nurse. They had a guy come in who had gotten slammed drunk. When he was passed out, his friend stuck 2 AA batteries up the guy's Johnson, not up his butt, his front. From what I remember, they had to actually cut the guy open to get them out and stitch it back together. Oh, I agree with you guys. I really hope he tried to charge them. He did tell my father-in-law they'd no longer be his friends. It's an incredible invasion of privacy, if not actual assault. I have no idea how one would pull this off. My friend is literally a butt doctor, and she told me about patients coming in with 10-inch marital aids stuck in their rear, and another one with a vibrating thingamy stuck while it's on. I got to see the x-ray of the 10-incher in there. It was really something. Apparently, he had tried to get it out of his butt for a few hours, struggled really hard, finally gave up and came in to see the doc. That thing still makes me laugh, though. I mean, I put a lot of stuff in my butt. Please don't post about it on Reddit, doctors. This is my dad's story, and not necessarily a weird object, but bear with me. He was working one night, and some poor soul came in with a vibrating toy stuck on up there. To lighten the mood, my dad asked if he wanted it removed or just needed the batteries changed. He may have been asked to go to sensitivity training after that one. You know what? I think I would have appreciated the levity. But then again, I guess I wouldn't care as much about being perceived as gay as some of these middle American surgeries. So if me and my doctor are both on the same page about me ramming things in my rear end, sure, why not make a joke about it? Operating room nurse here. One time I helped remove a G.I. Joe from someone's butt, like a full-size 12-inch OG doll. The x-ray was really funny. My nurse friend had a girl who had a lot of downstairs pain and some bleeding. The doctor took a look and found a horrific smell and discovered a chocolate bar wrapper stuck up there. Turns out her and her boyfriend didn't have a traditional contraceptive and decided the wrapper would do in a pinch. And the jagged edges had cut her on the inside and still had the remnants from several days ago. They found another man's member, and just the member. A French nurse here. I've once seen a 75-year-old man with 3 pétanque balls in his butt. You know, I'm here for all the unqualified posts of people saying, I'm not a surgeon, but I happen to have a butt, several weird objects, and a Dr. Dre album. Does that count? Half a nunchuck. The other half left a nice scar between the eyes of his girlfriend when it broke. She needed stitches. Remember kids, cheap nunchucks you win at a carnival make bad bedroom toys. Wife is a surgeon resident. She's had to remove a toilet brush from a man's butt. When asked why it was up there, he said he wondered how it would feel. Turns out he also wondered about plungers and toothbrushes too. While on my surgery rotation, the weirdest thing I had to remove from a butt was a half-rotten carrot. The patient had put it in thick side first, so it was very slimy and very difficult to get out. We eventually had to take the patient to the operating room, and even then, we opened the OB gin tray to fully get it out. And of course, this happened at like 3 a.m. Yeah, the surgeon was not happy to drive into the work and activate the OR for this. Of course, this sparked a discussion of things people put up their butt, and the winner was the chief PA. He had seen a guy put a Barbie doll up there, and it was stuck because the arms come out so it was like a barb. It was actually considered a surgical emergency because the hard plastic of the arms had torn apart the rectum, and he was starting to become septic. I can't imagine how the surgeon explained that to his wife. I've been a surgeon for 15 years, and let me tell you, the weirdest thing? Probably Legos. I'm talking Lego people and Lego bricks. So many small pieces. It's hard for me to watch my kids play with them now knowing what I know. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.